If there are no further points of orders, the Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, second reading.
Now.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call the Secretary of State, John Healey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time. Today, this government takes a major step to strengthen support for our armed forces and for the families who stand behind them. The first duty of any government is to keep our nation safe, and at the heart of that security are the men and women of our armed forces. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in this role I have the privilege of meeting many of those men and women who serve proudly here in the UK and around the world. I see firsthand their dedication, their professionalism, and some of the extraordinary sacrifices they make in defence of our nation. From the 700 personnel who rapidly deployed to Cyprus over the summer to support our contingency planning for the safety of UK nationals in Lebanon, to the 140 Royal Navy submariners that I met recently at Faslane as they completed the final leg of their sea patrol. Madam Deputy Speaker, I had to apologise that my face was the first one they had seen upon arriving home after so many months. On all sides of the House, we thank them for such service. And I know too that all members will join me in recognising that when we talk about loved ones away from home, a spouse, a parent, who may be deployed at a moment's notice to another part of the UK or another part of the world, it is the sacrifices that are made not only by those in uniform, but by the family members who support them. We cannot say it enough that our forces family live their lives in service to the nation. And so the bill before the House today establishes an independent Armed Forces Commissioner to improve service life for our serving personnel and for their families. It is significant and it is long overdue. I give way.
I thank the Secretary of State and indeed welcome his Armed Forces Commissioner Bill. As he's rightly pointed out, that this bill will allow serving personnel, our brave service personnel, and their families to make complaints to the Commissioner. But that right has not been given to bereaved family members. So can my right honourable friend give me in the House that reassurance that bereaved families will also be given that right?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can indeed. Our definition of relevant family member, which is on the face of the bill, will include bereaved families. I will.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. The other group, of course, that's excluded from this provision are veterans, and I speak as a veteran. Why isn't the Secretary of State concerned about them, and shouldn't they come under the auspices of this new official too? An example might be perhaps those who were exposed to potential contaminants at Camp Lejeune in the US, and that would be a thematic investigation that the new Commissioner might, for example, undertake.
So, Madam Deputy Speaker, our first priority are those who serve with their families, those who are subject to service law. The case of veterans means that the range of agencies and services that support them are very different, and a better way of improving the support to veterans will be the full implementation into law of the Armed Forces Covenant, and will be the range of steps that my honourable friend, the Minister for Veterans and Defence People, has already started to take. So we've taken the view in this bill. This is a Commissioner who will give their first priority and full focus to those who are serving and their families who are also impacted by their service life. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I said this is significant and it is long overdue. And it's long overdue because for the last 14 years the forces have been badly let down. The Conservatives have created a crisis in recruitment. a crisis in retention, a crisis in morale. And last year, the trained strength of the armed forces fell at the fastest rate for a decade, with 300 more personnel leaving than joining every month. And last year, service morale fell to its lowest record level. Only 4 in 10 of our forces personnel report being satisfied with service life, while the impact on families and on personal life was the leading factor they report influencing their decision to leave. I will.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. He will know that whilst the government systematically failed, communities around the country through military covenants did their best to support serving personnel and their families. Some did it really well, others did not. So could my right honourable friend say a little bit more about what role he sees for covenants in the work of the Armed Forces Commissioner to ensure that those commitments that are made in good faith by agencies around the country are delivered on, so that those serving personnel can have easier, more rewarding lives together with their family?
So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Covenant sets the important principle that no one serving or who has served should be disadvantaged by that service. That's why, as an opposition party before the election, we supported the then government in their partial translation of the Covenant into law. The job's only half done. We will complete that. We aim to do that in the Armed Forces Bill to come. But the role of the Commissioner, with the context of the Covenant around it, but nevertheless the Commissioner will draw their powers from this legislation. They will have their role defined in this legislation, and they will become a powerful independent voice for those who serve and for the families who stand behind them. Madam Deputy Speaker, they've been failed too long, both our forces and their families. And this is why the government is determined now to renew the nation's contract with those who serve. It's why the government is putting people at the heart of our defence plans, and why I'm now introducing this legislation as a priority in the first legislative session of this government. We can't reverse these deep-set problems overnight, but it is our mission to lift military morale, and in these first 4 months, we've been getting on with that job. We're investing in our servicemen and women, giving them the highest pay rise for over 20 years. We're putting forces families first, expanding childcare for forces families overseas. We're starting to fix forces recruitment with new recruitment targets, cutting red tape, and a new direct cyber route to recruit into the armed forces. And we're improving service life by introducing this bill today in Parliament to establish the Armed Forces Commissioner. A government delivering for defence and delivering our manifesto commitment to establish that Commissioner as an independent champion for our forces and their families to improve service life. The Commissioner will be our direct point of contact for serving personnel and their families, who can raise concerns which may impact on their service lives and their ability to serve. Everything from kit, to food, to housing, to medical care, to study programmes, to promotions, to childcare, to support for spouses in work. The role, Madam Deputy Speaker, is inspired by the long-established German Parliamentary Commissioner for the Armed Forces, which enjoys cross-party support in the Bundestag and support across the military. Dr. Eva Högel, the current Commissioner in Germany, told me, since 1959, she said, the year the German Commissioner was first established, it has become well recognised, respected and unchallenged as an institution in Germany, safeguarding the basic rights of our soldiers. She went on to say, I would be delighted if this success story were to be repeated in the UK, and that's exactly what we aim to do. The Commissioner will have necessary access to personnel, to information and to defence sites. The Commissioner will have the power to hear directly from service personnel and family members on the concerns connected with their service, the power to investigate individual concerns and launch wide-ranging thematic investigations into those issues which materially impact the personnel and the families of the forces. They will have the power to demand access to information to facilitate their investigations and also to demand access to service premises and in the UK to make those visits unannounced.
Sorry, can we give away on that?
I will.
Thank you, the Minister, for giving away. I was just wondering, how does the Minister envisage the Commissioner standing alongside others in the armed forces in terms of chain of command, and has an assessment been taken into that?
Yeah, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Commissioner is independent from the chain of command, separate from the chain of command, with powers that do not depend or account to in any way the chain of command. They'll have the power to make recommendations to improve service life and to set those out and their findings in their investigations in reports to be laid before Parliament. Their annual report will be an independent report to Parliament on the state of the forces and what we must do to improve our offer as a government and as a nation to those who serve. And it is my intention that a debate on that report becomes a regular part of the parliamentary calendar each year and every year. The Commissioner and their reports will challenge ministers, will strengthen parliamentary oversight, and will raise awareness of the issues facing our forces. The Commissioner will be subject to pre-appointment scrutiny by the Commons Defence Select Committee. On that point, I will indeed.
I thank the Secretary of State, and he is indeed being very, very generous with his time. I note from the proposed legislation that there isn't the prospect of an approval being sought from the Cross-Party Defence Committee, although there will be a pre-appointment hearing, as the Secretary of State has just alluded. So can my right honourable friend give me an undertaking, and this House an undertaking, that if our committee has concerns, that the Secretary of State will listen very closely to those recommendations and will take action accordingly?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Select Committee Chair for intervening on this point. The legislation and what I propose reflects the current arrangements and practices within Parliament. I'm very keen that the committee exercises the toughest pre-legislative scrutiny. We need somebody who is appointed as a commissioner who can do the job as a fearless, independent champion. And I will certainly, as he asks me, listen very closely and take close note to the views of the committee in any pre-legislative hearing. The bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, also provides for the Commissioner to absorb the existing powers of the Service Complaints Ombudsman. And of course, the Ombudsman role is too narrow, it's entirely reactive, it can only consider formal individual grievances after the service complaints system has been completed, and then can only judge whether or not that process has been reasonable. I expect that the Armed Forces Commissioner will challenge us to do better in the service complaints system and widely across service life. I expect the Commissioner will develop strong views on improving the service complaints system, and I believe the future Armed Forces Bill will offer us the right opportunity for that should primary legislation be required. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is landmark legislation to establish an independent Armed Forces Commissioner with the mission to improve service life. For the first time, a champion for our armed forces. For the first time, a champion for forces families. For the first time, a champion with serious powers to access every part of service life, who reports in public to Parliament. I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call Shadow Minister James Cartlidge.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At all times and on both sides of the House, we should want to ensure that our armed forces have our back and that their morale and the offer from the MOD is as strong as possible. We recognise that this bill introduces a manifesto commitment for which the government have a clear mandate, and moreover that this creates a new mechanism by which the MOD intend to boost the day-to-day experience of our armed forces personnel. No one could disagree with that goal. And whilst it remains to be seen exactly how this bill will deliver in practice, we will not be opposing it, but want to be a constructive, critical friend to the bill. Because the least that those who bravely put their lives on the line to defend our country deserve is proper scrutiny from Parliament in matters of legislation and the armed forces. Of course, there are areas of welfare not directly affected by this bill where we want to see further progress, but in terms of the bill's specific provisions, we have a number of matters that we wish to probe. At face value, there is clearly merit in seeking to ensure extra accountability for how welfare matters are conducted in the forces. I note in particular, as the Secretary of State just stressed, that the Commissioner will explicitly not be drawn from the ranks of either the military or the civil service precisely to deliver genuine independence. In many ways, not dissimilar to the principle I wanted to see in the integrated procurement model back in February, with the idea of a second opinion in procurement, not least from DSTL and the science base. The point being, in order to ensure major procurement programmes and the requirement requests from the single services could similarly be subject to genuine challenge and transparency. After all, it was the Sheldon inquiry which focused on transparency and openness as key tools to guarding against the bad culture which can pertain without confidence for military personnel and officials to come forward and air their concerns, what we call being psychologically confident. Therefore, in principle, this proposal does appear to be consistent with that push for a more transparent culture in defence that makes it harder to hide embedded problems. The most serious such example could potentially include the issues raised by the Lyons Review and the Defence Committee's Women in the Armed Forces report, as referred to by the Honourable Lady for South Shields in all questions earlier. So as such, if this new office of the Commissioner genuinely exposes cultural weaknesses and hidden systemic problems that would otherwise not have been disclosed or would take longer to emerge, it should be welcome. That said, this extra transparency cannot be at the expense of operational effectiveness. That is why one of the most significant issues we will want to probe further is the interaction between the Commissioner and the chain of command, especially in sensitive operational settings. It states on the bill that visits will not be permitted on national security grounds. But what if the Commissioner and the chain of command disagree on whether those grounds apply? Is the Secretary of State going to adjudicate, and if so, how will that work in practice? As my honourable friend for Spelthorne alluded to in his oral question earlier, how in practice are such visits going to work in relation to live operations without disrupting them? We must have clarity. Off the back of the Armed Forces Services Complaints and Financial Assistance Act 2015, the previous government did much work to reduce bureaucracy and shorten the complaints process and to strengthen oversight. So it's really important that this is not undermined through the organisational upheaval that the bill will inevitably generate. What steps will the government take to ensure a smooth handover, especially in relation to existing casework? I think quite a few of our colleagues have experienced that recently. In terms of territorial application of the bill, as things stand, there is a permissive extent clause enabling an ordering council to provide for relevant sections of the legislation to extend to the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, or any of the British overseas territories except Gibraltar. Firstly, what is the rationale for apparently excluding Gibraltar? Secondly, what of the US visiting forces? As Minister for Defence Procurement with responsibility for the estate, I visited both Lakenheath and Mildenhall in my county of Suffolk, where there is significant presence of US forces, F-35s, F-15s, and had the pleasure to meet the then commanding officer, Major General Campo. And there were a significant number of infrastructure, planning and other matters where inevitably the USVF needed clearance and input from the UK MOD. What will the Commissioner's responsibilities be in relation to USVF, particularly where there are British personnel stationed alongside them? And similarly, in the case of the many nations assisting with training Ukrainians for Operation Interflex in the UK bases, what about their personnel? My old friend for South West Wiltshire made a very good intervention. We agree, we want to question about the point about veterans, and we will be probing that in committee. Finally, in terms of costs, we note that the Department expects the annual cost of the Commissioner to be higher than that of the current Ombudsman, and overall in the region of approximately £5 million. Does the Secretary of State anticipate that the cost will grow further and above this estimation in the years ahead as the Commissioner becomes more established? Madam Deputy Speaker, more broadly, we know there are many issues affecting morale, recruitment and retention in the armed forces. We want to see this bill succeed, but there remain a number of areas of concern where delivering a better offer to our service personnel is critical. On recruitment and retention, hopefully everyone here understands the critical importance of boarding school to service families, and there's very few places not in the independent sector. This provides stability for their children in a career that does not automatically lend itself to such. And yet, families affected by VAT on school fees will not find out till December how exactly they're going to be hit by a tax that commences the very next month. And remember, many such families do not receive continuity of education allowance and will have to cover a 20% hike in fees from their taxed income, which is why we wanted on this side of the House the type of exemption for all children of service families from VAT as that offered to send children with an EHCP certificate. I will be voting.
Also agree with me that it's just not fair on the small businesses that are independent schools, such as Warminster School in my constituency, that have traditionally taken a significant number of service pupils, if they have that level of uncertainty as to what the school roll will look like in January.
Pay tribute to those sorts of schools and how they share in society's commitment to our armed forces. And what I would just say is this. It's actually been Labour policy since the 2017 general election, 7.5 years ago, to introduce VAT on school fees. And as I say, families who may have personnel serving abroad this Christmas will have just December to find out how they're going to deal with whatever those new fees mean for them. That is a shockingly short level of notice. On pay, we do agree with the need to ensure those who serve their country are appropriately rewarded, which is why in 2023 we announced a core armed forces pay rise of 5% plus further consolidated increase of £1,000, equating to a rise of approximately 9.7% for the most junior ranks and including a freeze in food charges. But alongside pay, Madam Deputy Speaker, accommodation is clearly an important part of the offer from the MOD where we all accept much more needs to be done and which will presumably form a key focus for the Commissioner. I stand by what I said at the Remembrance debate, namely it is the underlying structural nature of so much of the accommodation in the defence estate that is the problem, and for that reason, as a Minister, I wanted to see us potentially buying back the defence estate in England and Wales from Annington so that we could plan a full rebuild and regeneration of the estate, the long-term solution that I think the Veterans Minister referred to earlier, and I hope the Government will take that word forward, but I appreciate it is highly legally and commercially sensitive and there's limit to what they can say on that. In terms of the short term, the lesson from our winter plan of last year is that investment and a plan for the defence estate can still yield results. Early on as Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, responsible for the estate in 2023, I accepted that the previous winter we had let down service families, and with the backing of Ben Wallace and then Grant Shapps, we secured £400 million in the DCPR and delivered a winter plan which has seen thousands of homes treated for issues such as damp and mould, with complaints to contractors falling sharply from winter 2023 to 2022, compared to 2022. But this gets to the final critical point of funding. The new Commissioner will almost certainly be assailed with accommodation cases. But any reports he produces will inevitably form one conclusion: the need for more investment in the estate when there are so many other competing priorities. That £400 million that we announced required us to make choices about spending and to prioritise accommodation and the welfare of personnel against other pools on funding. So it's incredibly important that the Government does commit to 2.5% as soon as possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State will inevitably say that the last time we reached 2.5% was in 2010. I could as easily say that the last time we reached 3% was in 1996. They were 2 points on a consistently falling pathway of spending since the Cold War because successive governments believed, like many around the world, that we were in a more peaceful era. That is a statement of fact. The point is, welfare in the military is about us as a nation and a government saying to those who serve, we have your back. And that is impossible without more funding, and that means a definitive date for getting to 2.5%. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Conservative Party will always support the welfare of service personnel, and that is why we will try and work constructively with the Government on this bill. We will not be dividing the House this evening.
Yeah.
I call Chair of the Select Committee, Singh, Dhesi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And no one could argue with the honourable intent behind this bill to improve service life. I believe it's why there is widespread support for the main proposal in the bill, an enhanced role with new investigative powers. Indeed, the current Service Complaints Ombudsman and her predecessor have both called for powers along these very lines. And it was, of course, a commitment in the manifesto upon which my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I stood during the election. The Defence Committee, Madam Deputy Speaker, published a letter last Thursday setting out our initial thoughts on the bill to inform the House's scrutiny today. We had hoped to have time to take account of the views of representatives of armed forces communities as well as the Service Complaints Ombudsman. But the pace of events made that impossible. As a result, my remarks contain more questions than conclusions at this stage. If the government are to be judged by their own success criteria, the two key questions for the House are, first, how far would the bill go towards improving service life? And second, is the Commissioner, as established by the bill, given the right powers, protections and resources to be able to act as a strong, independent champion for our gallant armed forces and their families that they deserve and that the government has promised? Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Defence Committee, I would ask the Minister within his winding up speech, in addition to what the Defence Secretary outlined earlier, to address the specific points that we've raised in our letter. What are the government's priorities for improving the service complaint system itself? It's striking that the bill contains only one change to this system when successive ombudsmen have found that the system as a whole is not efficient, effective and fair. To bring the bill to life, are there examples from the past to which the Minister would like to draw the House's attention, where he believes the new power to conduct investigations into general service matters would have improved service life if only the power had existed at that time? It would be helpful if the Minister could also clarify, as far as possible, who will and who won't be able to contact the Commissioner under Clause 4 of the bill to enable them to investigate a general service welfare matter. Members of the reserve forces, family members of reservists, former partners and former spouses of serving personnel, bereaved service families, for which the Secretary of State has thankfully already given a clarification. I know this is a matter of interest and concern to representatives of armed forces communities such as the Royal British Legion. Madam Deputy Speaker, the independence of the Commissioner is what I want to now come on to, because that will be crucial in maintaining the confidence and trust of the armed forces community. Yes.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, listening very carefully to what he has to say. Can I tempt him to agree with me that the Armed Forces Ombudsman Commissioner should have his or her powers extended to veterans, particularly on the grounds that a lot of the issues that he or she may be looking at thematically would be by way of being hybrid things that affect both the veterans community and those who are currently serving. And at the risk of being accused of being a one-trick pony, can I suggest that the Camp Lejeune example is a very good one to exemplify that point?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would never accuse my honourable friend of being a one-trick pony, and indeed he does tempt me, but that is something that I would like, not the one-trick pony, but the aspect around the veterans, for when we are in the Bill Committee and thereafter to look into these aspects of veterans, reserve forces and so forth. Madam Deputy Speaker, the German Armed Forces Commissioner, the inspiration behind the bill, as the Secretary of State highlighted, is established as entirely independent of the German Defence Ministry and Armed Forces. But that is not the case for the Commissioner under this bill. The Secretary of State will appoint and be able to dismiss. The Secretary of State will fund the Commissioner and agree their staffing arrangements, as I discussed earlier. And I'm very, very grateful, by the way, to the Minister for his briefing at the MOD this morning, where I was able to highlight just some of my initial concerns. And the Secretary of State will be able to constrain the exercise of their powers on broad grounds of national security and personal safety. So when ministers describe the proposed Armed Forces Commissioner as independent, they must surely mean something else. So can my honourable friend, the Minister, explain exactly what? And can he tell us why he has not decided to go further in ensuring the independence of the Commissioner from his department? Can the Minister also explain how the Commissioner's resourcing requirements have been estimated, and what the process would be if the Commissioner asked for additional resources? And who would find out, and how, if the Commissioner was denied resources that they had requested? Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill arrives during a crisis in armed forces recruitment and retention, with high levels of dissatisfaction with service life and an unacceptable level of inappropriate behaviour in the armed forces, which our Defence Committee will be delving into in greater detail. This bill cannot solve these challenges on its own. It would be helpful to hear from the Minister exactly how the bill sits within a coherent strategy and a set of broader measures, so that the House can consider the bill in context. Expectations of the new Armed Forces Commissioner will be high. They will need to be a strong character with the best interests of the armed forces in mind. They will need to be prepared for questions and challenge, but also to understand, win support and change hearts and minds. Their success, Madam Deputy Speaker, will likely ultimately depend on the support and trust of the armed forces, including the chain of command. What kind of person does the government imagine filling that role? How, if at all, will the key requirements for the role differ from those for the Service Complaints Ombudsman? I appreciate, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I have asked a lot of questions of the Minister, but I know he's a very, very capable individual, and I know he's been taking copious notes, so no doubt he will be able to answer all of these within his speech. My Defence Committee colleagues and I warmly welcome the Government's intention to allow the committee to conduct a non-binding pre-appointment hearing for the Secretary of State's preferred candidate for the role. As the Secretary of State has highlighted, this is in line with the existing practice for the appointment of the Service Complaints Ombudsman. The Defence Committee has always offered both support and scrutiny to the Ombudsman, and we look forward to working closely with the new Commissioner. They will no doubt become a regular witness, I hope, before the committee. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the Government will ensure the smoothest possible transition between the two roles. Thank you very much.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today I speak for my party in support of the legislation before us. It's clear that the armed forces community has been let down, not least under the previous Conservative government. And the findings of recent reports and surveys are testament to this. So in 2023, the Haythorne-Waite report found that the most common reason for leaving the armed forces is the impact on family and personal life, and overall satisfaction of the service life was just 45%. And only just over a third of personnel reported that they felt valued by the service. The Atherton report found that the MOD and the services are failing to protect female personnel and to help service women achieve their full potential. It's unacceptable that the experience of women in the armed forces and the challenges which many women personnel face, such as sexual harassment and discrimination, have not been properly addressed. And armed forces families are also too frequently being let down. The Armed Forces Continuing Attitude Survey found that 1/3 of spouses said that they would be happier if their partner chose to leave the service. There are too many cases where service families are too frequently unable to get basic support, such as access to information, except through the member of the family who serves. And the current complaints system is not working. In her most recent annual report to the Parliament, the Service Complaints Ombudsman, Mariette Hughes, is scathing, saying that she remains unable to say that the service complaint system is efficient, effective or fair, the 8th consecutive year that she has reached this assessment. Women remain disproportionately represented in the complaint system. Madam Deputy Speaker, those who served in the armed forces and their families are putting their lives on the line for our country, and it's profoundly disappointing to read report after report which makes clear that they have been and continue to be neglected, ignored and taken for granted. They simply deserve better. Delivering a fair deal for the armed forces community isn't just the right thing to do, it's crucial for our national security. The current conditions within which service personnel operate and their families endure are directly contributing to the crisis in recruitment and retention which our armed forces are experiencing. In an increasing insecure world, with Putin's troops waging their illegal war in Ukraine, with Trump about to return to the White House, we simply cannot afford to not take this issue seriously. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, Liberal Democrats very much welcome this bill. We welcome that the Commissioner will be a much-needed point of contact for armed forces families, that the Commissioner will be a public champion for families, tasked in law with raising awareness of welfare issues faced by armed forces community, and that the Commissioner will be properly empowered to independently investigate complaints, including being able to arrive on sites without notice. We're pleased that this legislation has been introduced to Parliament less than 6 months after the election, and we will support this bill and we will work with members on all sides of the House to strengthen it during its passage through the House. I'd like to thank the Service Complaints Ombudsman and her office for the work they have done since 2015, offering independent insight into the process and highlighting the failings of the existing complaint system. It is right that the work of the office shall now be subsumed into this stronger role, but as the Ombudsman herself made clear, further work needs to be done to bring the service complaint system itself up to standard, and I would have liked to see this piece of legislation being used to set that in motion. We must also ensure that this bill delivers for the armed forces families. Families are at the very heart of this bill and will clearly be of significant importance to the work of the new Commissioner, but Clause 4 of the bill leaves the definition of family member up to the Secretary of State. So we hope that during the passage of the bill, the Government might be able to commit a definition on the face of the bill so that there's certainty for armed forces families. It's also important that we ensure that those families made up of kinship carers, often aunts and uncles who now care for nieces or nephews, are also included under the scope of the definition. And we must also think of divorced partners who are still affected. And so it's vital that bereaved families are included under the scope of definition and accordingly the work of the Commissioner. I hope that members across the House will agree that bereaved families need the advocacy of the new Commissioner as much, if not more, than anyone else in the armed forces community. And we also need to ensure that the reservists and recruits have equal access to the Commissioner. With regards to female, BAME personnel, non-UK and LGBTQ+ personnel, the Government must ensure that the Commissioner's Office is equipped with up-to-date evidence and community connections to identify issues and be able to reach out into these communities. It is to that advocacy role that I now turn. It is set out in Clause 1 of the bill that the role of the Commissioner will not just promote welfare of personnel, service personnel and their families, but to improve the public's awareness of welfare issues faced by armed forces families. I hope that the Minister will be able to shed some light on how they envisage these two separate functions interacting in practice. The crucial issue is resource. We need to ensure that both of these ambitions can be met, as well as the existing responsibilities of the Ombudsman role, which is being subsumed into the Commissioner's remit. I urge the Government to offer assurances on this front. I also hope the Minister might be able to offer further clarity on the appointment process, as well as subsequent timescales for getting the Office of the Commissioner up and running. The Government have committed to pre-appointment scrutiny of the preferred candidate by the Defence Select Committee, but what happens if the Select Committee disagrees? Clearly, whoever is appointed to this role must truly be independent of government. We saw under the previous Conservative government the limitations of the existing public appointments process, even where select committees are involved. Giving relevant committees a confirmatory vote would greatly strengthen the safeguards in the appointment process and ensure that the best person for the job will be put forward, rather than the best person for the government. Can the Minister also provide clarity on how the Armed Forces Commissioner will interact with the existing Veterans Commissioner for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland and the proposed National Veterans Commissioner for England? The Armed Forces Commissioner must prioritise accessibility to the communities they aim to represent and support. So to this end, we must ensure that if access is digital only, that this does not create a barrier to access if individuals are deployed or have a low reading age, for example. It is vital that our armed forces know who they can turn to for the support when they need it. Military personnel are trained to be resilient and endure tough conditions, and the culture doesn't make it easy for people to reach out. and I've personal experience of this. If we are to introduce an Armed Forces Commissioner, then the government needs to include an effort for culture change as well. I would welcome greater understanding as to how the government will achieve this. I understand that individuals who have served in the armed forces may be considered in this position. Such individuals would bring valuable knowledge and insight, but how will the government ensure that they are sufficiently removed from the current culture, enabling an independent perspective? Madam Deputy Speaker, it's also vital that while we welcome the creation of this new role, we acknowledge that it will in no way be a silver bullet for addressing the great many problems faced by the armed forces community, which I and other members have touched on. For serious complaints, for instance, we need to strengthen rules to help support whistleblowers across government, and we as Liberal Democrats continue to support the creation of an Office of the Whistleblower for this purpose. And we urge the government to go further and fully implement the Atherton report to ensure that women in the armed forces, who have far too frequently been let down, receive the fundamental protections they deserve. We should also look at strengthening the Armed Forces Covenant. Can the Minister set out whether the role of the Commissioner will be subject to give due regard to the Covenant, and will the Minister agree to strengthen the Armed Forces Covenant by placing a legal duty on all government departments to give due regard to it? We'll continue to set forward proposals to improve the quality of life for service personnel and their families. There are basic steps which we can and should take, like establishing a one-stop shop for families of service personnel so they can easily access information, including the publication of a guide and an accessible helpline. Housing, too, is also hugely important. Service personnel and their families should be able to live in a decent home, and I want to pay tribute to the work of my honourable friend from North Shropshire, who has campaigned on the issue of a decent home standard for military housing. When the Renters' Right Bill comes before the House for its remaining stages, I hope that the Government will listen to the representation from these benches that we should enshrine the decent home standard in law for military housing. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the armed forces community deserves a fair deal. We on these benches support these measures before us today as a step in the right direction, but we will continue to call on the Government to do more to ensure that service personnel and their families are not taken for granted any longer.
I call Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, let me welcome this bill. It's great news, and as someone who only left full-time service last year, it's fantastic to see the pledges that I hoped the government would carry out being brought now, hopefully, into law. I first came across this proposed bill when we were joined by Eva Hogel, who is the German Armed Forces Commissioner, last year here in Parliament at a panel event. For myself, it was only a couple of weeks after I left full-time service and only 1 week after being selected as the Labour parliamentary candidate for Plymouth Moor View. And so it was an exciting moment a year ago, but it felt very far away, an Armed Forces Commissioner. It felt like something very positive that the Germans had, that we should have, but to do it we needed to have a Labour government, and we didn't know when the election was. That has now all come about. We have that Labour government. We committed to delivering an Armed Forces Commissioner, and it's fantastic that we're doing so. Can I commend the parties opposite, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, for how they are approaching this bill in the collegiate atmosphere. I know I speak for many colleagues on this side of the House when I say that matters of armed forces and veterans' welfare are overly politicised in this country. So to really approach this as one House is really positive. And I hope the Liberal Democrat spokesperson will be encouraged by how much the Labour Party is holding up the German Armed Forces Commissioner as a model. Eva Hogel is A, a woman, and B, hasn't served in the military. And so I'm sure those considerations will be made when the government makes their appointments. What I would like to say is that one of the aims of the Armed Forces Commissioner, as per the bill, is to promote the welfare of serving personnel and families, including the bereaved families, as we mentioned. But the second listed output of the Armed Forces Commissioner is actually to improve the public's understanding of the welfare issues faced by serving personnel. I think that is a fantastic step that the government has taken, because that is something that really holds back serving people. In particular, when you are drafted, as anyone who's been in the military will have experienced, to a new community where you are not from, where you don't have roots laid down, you are then at the mercy of what your camp, your base can provide you, what they maybe own in that area, so you can get military housing, or maybe not, maybe you're on camp. And then beyond that, you play part to the local politics, the local government, whether that's a parish council, town council, and it can be very challenging for serving personnel to understand and to communicate with local government. And that's why it was good to hear colleagues mention earlier that so many councils have run really positive schemes of having armed forces champions, having their own armed forces covenant, and in Plymouth, where I represent, along with the government's armed forces minister, we have got a fantastic Plymouth City Council Armed Forces Champions scheme, which, if colleagues haven't seen, I would encourage them to look at, because it's, I know from speaking to residents, had massive effect for veterans and for serving personnel. So one of the questions that the government will face with this Armed Forces Commissioner bill is, what is the relationship between the Armed Forces Commissioner and between local government? And then, as a third party to that, between the tri-service military aspect. Because, yes, listening is important, but doing is important. So we need to understand how can the Armed Forces Commissioner actually bring about solutions and outcomes for residents, and also for serving personnel. I just also want to touch on the reservist aspect, and the Chair of the Defence Committee brought it up, and I know it's been mentioned before, but looking closely at the bill, what it states is that anyone who comes under service law, under military law, will be entitled to access the Armed Forces Commissioner. Now, for reservists, and I am now a proud Royal Marines reservist as of last year, you are subject to military law when you are serving as a reservist, but sometimes you are not. So you are on duty, and then when you're not on duty, you are not. So that just needs to be clarified for reservists, because to really maximise the output reservists have, which absolutely is something that I know the Defence Department of this government are very keen to do, we need to make sure that reservists feel wrapped up in the system, not just operationally, not just in training, but also in that welfare sense. So they need to know when can they act as the Armed Forces Commissioner. For example, is it just on a Wednesday night when they're in their detachment, or is it all through the week? And obviously the answer should be all through the week. So I'd encourage the government to commit to that. Finally, I'd like to commend the Secretary of State, who's briefly left the chamber, because in the military you are often taught about having courage in your convictions. And I would just note that having an Armed Forces Commissioner who is going to report to Parliament on an annual basis is not going to be easy for the Secretary of State, because they're unlikely to report with solely good findings every year. In fact, quite the opposite. They're probably going to point out things we need to be doing, which is good. And it's the sign of a strong, confident leadership that we're willing to appoint people who are going to point out flaws in the system, flaws that are going to be difficult and potentially expensive to solve. So, all in all, I massively welcome the Armed Forces Commissioner as a concept, and the bill as well. There are some details that we'd love to know the answers to, but I look forward to hearing them in due course. Thank you.
Yeah. I call David Reid.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's encouraging to see cross-party support for this bill, and it's a real pleasure to be in the chamber this evening with all four former Royal Marines who have come into Parliament in 2024. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the introduction of the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill. We all share the same goal, that is, improving the welfare and support of those who have served in our armed forces and their families. The creation of an independent commissioner is a positive step towards providing personnel with a direct point of contact to raise concerns and ensuring that issues affecting service life are investigated and reported to Parliament. However, as we work to implement this bill, it is critical that we critically examine its details to ensure it effectively meets the needs of our armed forces community. The armed forces play an essential role in protecting our nation, and we must ensure that they are equipped, supported and staffed with the best talent. Having seen firsthand the dedication of service personnel at the Commando Training Centre, Royal Marines, in my constituency, I understand the commitment of our servicemen and women. However, the reality is that recruitment and retention numbers are falling short. Recent data from the Ministry of Defence reveals a troubling trend. Last year, the Royal Navy met just 60% of its recruitment target, the Army 63%, the RAF 70%. These significant shortfalls underscore the urgent need to enhance the overall offer to our armed forces, ensuring we can attract and retain the talented individuals essential to safeguarding our nation. This is why we are taking a bipartisan approach to this bill. We all agree that improving the welfare of our armed forces is essential, and we will work with the government to ensure that this bill achieves these aims. Recruitment, however, is only a part of the challenge. retention is just as critical. In the year to October 2023, 16,200 personnel left the armed forces, while only 10,400 joined. This exodus of skilled personnel puts the very strength of our military at risk. At the heart of the retention challenge lies the offer made to our service personnel. Now, having personally served across tri-service units, I have seen firsthand the offering that has been made to our service personnel during the last Labour government and subsequent governments up to 2015. Although I personally never found an issue and loved my service, the older I've become, I've seen friends who have remained in service doing the normal things that we do in life, that is getting married, starting families and moving family homes. I've witnessed the additional pressures that they have faced. I've heard of the challenges around housing not being up to par, and I know that many people in this chamber believe that quality housing and a work-life balance directly impacts the desire of service personnel to want to stay in the military. We must always ensure our personnel are properly looked after and that their conditions reflect the importance of the role they play. This reality is that until we address these issues comprehensively, the retention of talented personnel will continue to be a significant challenge. It is also no secret, Madam Deputy Speaker, that since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we have all benefited from the peace dividend derived from a unipolar world, which has allowed us to prioritise government spending in areas outside of defence. However, we all know that the international threats that we face, and it's essential that our armed forces are in a position to do what they have done best for hundreds of years, which is defend our country and our interests abroad. As we move forwards with the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, it's essential that we focus on the finer details to ensure that it delivers real improvements. These are important questions around scope, resources and independence that need addressing to guarantee that this new office will provide tangible improvements for our service members and ensure that the bill results in a stronger, more supported armed forces, one that is equipped to retain the best talent to serve our nation. The Commissioner's role must be clearly defined to avoid overlap with existing military structures. Now, while the bill grants the Commissioner the power to investigate welfare matters, it's crucial that this role does not encroach on areas of military discipline or law. The Commissioner should contemplate, not replace, existing military mechanisms, providing an additional layer of support for personnel where necessary. It's been raised already by other members this evening that establishing the rank or grade of the Commissioner is essential, ensuring that they hold a senior position, but one that respects the operational command and discipline of the armed forces. Although the Commissioner will be independent in nature, they will be operating in a rank-structured environment, so it's important to establish what grade the Commissioner will be seen in the light of their high-ranking military officials. It's also crucial that the role of the Armed Forces Commissioner remains entirely independent of both the government and the party in power. This independence must be safeguarded not only by the Commissioner's decision-making, but also in their ability to hold the government of the day to account, without fear or favour. It will be important for the party opposite to set out in future sessions how this independence will be maintained, and it will be beneficial for the House to understand what Commissioner-led ministerial scrutiny looks like. Another point that's been raised by my honourable friend, Secretary of State, Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, is around security and classifications. The Commissioner will be granted significant powers to access Ministry of Defence sites and documents. However, it's vital that these powers are carefully controlled to prevent any potential compromise of national security and operational integrity. Access to sensitive or operational information should be tightly restricted and only permitted when necessary for investigating welfare issues. The Secretary of State must retain the discretion to limit access when national security is concerned, following strict security protocols to safeguard both personnel's welfare and military operations. While the Commissioner can investigate welfare matters, it is important that their role does not extend to interfering with military discipline or operational matters. Investigations related to military conduct should remain under the purview of military law. The Commissioner's involvement should be well understood in relation to wide-ranging welfare concerns or legal matters, ensuring clear boundaries to avoid disrupting the military's ability to function effectively. Coming on to the points around the Royal British Legion, and it's been nice to see that they have lent their support to this bill, which I fully endorse. I'm fully committed to ensuring that it's successfully implemented, as the points that the RBL have raised. but they have raised several important concerns that must be addressed to ensure the role of the Armed Forces Commissioner functions effectively. Given their extensive knowledge and expertise, these concerns deserve careful consideration before any final implementation. They have highlighted we must ensure the Commissioner is accessible to all service personnel, another point that's been raised this evening, regardless of their digital literacy or deployment circumstances. Relying solely on digital communications risks excluding those with limited access to technology, low digital skills, or those serving in areas with poor connectivity. To address this, we must ensure alternate methods of communication, such as phone lines or in-person support, are available. The RBL has also proposed an anonymous reporting mechanism similar to the Crime Stoppers to encourage personnel to raise concerns with confidence and security. While the potential for anonymity to increase reporting is clear, it is equally vital to strike a balance that allows the Commissioner to follow up on complaints and conduct thorough investigations where necessary. Another point that the RBL have raised, and some concern that service members may view raising concerns as part of their job or feel that they should handle issues on their own. For the Commissioner to be effective, it is important to shift how raising concerns are perceived. The Commissioner's role should help foster an environment where reporting issues is recognised as a positive and constructive step, essential for continuous improvement of service and the well-being of personnel. Achieving this will require a focused effort to encourage service members to seek support when needed without hesitation. The bill rightly extends the scope of support to service personnel and their families, but it is essential that we ensure this support encompasses all parts of the wider Armed Forces community. This includes reservists, recruits and veterans, who each face unique challenges and should not be overlooked. Reservists, for instance, often juggle civilian careers with military duties, and we've heard from the Honourable Member for Plymouth Moorview about some of those problems, and may encounter different support needs than regular personnel. Similarly, recruits who are at the beginning of their service journey require guidance and resources to ensure a smooth transition into military life. And lastly, veterans having served our country must continue to have access to appropriate support long after they leave active duty. By ensuring that the Commissioner's Office covers all these groups, we can create a truly comprehensive and inclusive support structure that meets the needs of every individual who is committed to serving our nation.
Will you give way on that point?
I will.
I thank my gallant friend for giving way on that point. A constituent of mine, Major Charles Mulroy, served a long time in the reserves, and he pointed out that on deployment it was often very difficult for the reserves to access the existing support that was in position for serving personnel there. Will my honourable friend agree with me that perhaps it might be helpful if the Commissioner could look into that aspect of military life?
I thank my honourable friend for raising those concerns, and I think that's definitely an issue that needs to be drawn out at later stages of this bill, so that everyone across the Armed Forces community, both reservists, regular and people that have left the Armed Forces, our veteran community, are all listened to by the Commissioner. That brings me to my conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Armed Forces Commissioner Bill is a positive step forwards. I think we all agree with that in this House this evening, in improving the welfare of our service personnel. But as we move forwards, it's crucial that we carefully examine its detail to ensure it effectively addresses the needs of the entire Armed Forces community. From defining the Commissioner's role to ensuring broad and equitable access, we must make sure that this bill delivers real, tangible improvements. Only by getting these details right can we strengthen our forces, ensure the retention of our best talent, and continue to support those who selflessly serve our country. We must work together in a bipartisan spirit to make this bill a success and give our armed forces the recognition and support they truly deserve.
Yeah. I call Luke Akehurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great honour to speak in this debate today, and I welcome the bipartisan tone and the constructive approach taken by the opposition parties in their contributions. It's very fitting that we're debating this bill for the first time so soon after the remembrance events held over the last few weeks. The members of our armed forces who put their life on the line for the safety and security of our country and our people give the greatest service it's possible to give. Over 5% of the adult population of my constituency of North Durham have served in our armed forces. As someone from a civilian background, I want to pay tribute to every one of our men and women in uniform, including the many honourable and gallant members on both sides of this House today who have served. This bill is a key part of renewing the nation's contract with our armed forces, because for too long, morale and satisfaction with service life among our armed forces has been falling. According to the latest Armed Forces Continuous Attitudes Survey, nearly 6 in 10 personnel rate their service morale as low, and this figure has sadly been increasing for the last few years. Just 1 in 10 personnel rate their service morale as high, and a third of personnel do not feel valued. But we know that service life impacts not just those in uniform, but their families too. Whether it's housing, employment, or the effect on their children, military spouses often have a negative view of the impact service life is having on them and their family. That's why it's so important that this bill will create the first ever independent champion, not just for service personnel, but also their families. Not only is this about the welfare of those who serve today, it's about making service life more attractive so that our rates of recruitment and retention in the armed forces improve. There is, of course, currently the Service Complaints Ombudsman, which was established by the Armed Forces Service Complaints and Financial Assistance Act 2015. But as the Secretary of State has already said, the Ombudsman's remit is too narrow and reactive. The Ombudsman can only investigate individual complaints after the service complaints process has finished. And the Ombudsman does not have the remit to consider broader matters impacting the welfare of serving personnel. Replacing the Ombudsman with a new Armed Forces Commissioner who can launch their own investigations and make broader recommendations is therefore a positive step forward. Indeed, this is something that's been called for by successive service complaints ombudsmen themselves. A new Armed Forces Commissioner will give service personnel and their families a direct contact to reach out to raise issues which impact service life, from equipment to accommodation and unacceptable behaviours. A note that the government has said it expects the budget for the Armed Forces Commissioner to be between £4.5 and £5.5 million a year. The German Armed Forces Commissioner, on which this new role, as the Secretary of State has said, is based, has 60 parliamentary staff to support them. I would be grateful if the Minister could, in winding up this debate, outline how many staff he envisages the UK Armed Forces Commissioner will have. I also know that the Defence Committee has raised questions about how we can ensure that the Commissioner is truly independent from the Secretary of State, and I would welcome further clarity on that. This bill fulfils the commitment in our manifesto to introduce an Armed Forces Commissioner. It acknowledges the need for change in order to better support serving personnel, with new powers to carry out investigations, visit defence sites unannounced and report to Parliament. The role outlined in this bill will clearly have a greater impact than existing arrangements, to the benefit of service personnel and their families, and ultimately, therefore, to the benefit of the morale and the retention rates of the armed forces and to the defence of the country. It is another action towards fulfilling the government's commitment to renewing the nation's contract with those who serve, and I therefore welcome the bill.
I call Dave Doogan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's interesting to be taking part in this debate with this outbreak of consensus, which is a little bit unsettling in this particular chamber. But the SNP will be doing nothing to rock that particular boat, because we welcome the Armed Forces Commissioner and especially their authority when it happens to investigate welfare complaints for our armed forces. It's been, Madam Deputy Speaker, a long time coming, and it's a welcome superseding of the Service Complaints Ombudsman and the vital element that allows servicemen and women recourse to a functioning complaint system out with the chain of command is only going to be good news and will be in step with ambitions of many honourable and right honourable members. Can I take this opportunity at this stage, Madam Deputy Speaker, to commend the foresight of my friend and colleague, the former member for West Dunbartonshire, Martin Docherty-Hughes, who brought forward his Armed Forces Representative Body Bill in 2019, and if it had to have been supported, would have achieved many of the same aims that this bill does, and would have done so 5 years earlier. But nevertheless, a key development now is the ability of the Commissioner to visit defence establishments unannounced and commission reports on what they find there, a central and vital improvement over the consequentially and demonstrably inadequate powers of the Ombudsman. These reports will face the scrutiny of colleagues in this chamber, and they will similarly, in addition, face the scrutiny of the Defence Select Committee, which is welcome, and I know that that will be applied with rigour. This should go a long way to shining a light on the manifold circumstances whereby many in our armed forces and their families have been treated poorly by successive UK governments. Much of this has been caused by disastrous privatisation misadventure pursued for short-term gains at the expense of long-term value, and where our men and women in uniform, together with their families, pay the price for that suboptimal policy in their daily lives and routines. We should also note that the issues facing armed forces personnel are already extremely well known and documented and understood within this chamber and out with. What the Commissioner must reveal, therefore, is the depth and scale of these issues, which, as already been touched on, will necessarily make difficult reading for the ministerial team, and I salute their ability to leave themselves open to that scrutiny. A key factor driving the poor experiences of armed forces personnel is the perpetual misallocation of funding and a lack of political will to establish a verifiable balance between the demands of the state on the armed forces to deliver defence and security and the vote of funding allocated to the armed forces by the same state to deliver against that priority. Everything, Madam Deputy Speaker, has an upper elastic limit, and if this government doesn't get its act together on allocating 2.5% for defence, I greatly fear our armed forces will exceed their upper limit very soon, Commissioner or not. They are asking for nothing, whether from junior ranks or to the Chief of the Defence Staff, other than long-term clarity to allow them to deliver long-term stability. A key performance indicator of any large organisation, especially one with such an unenviable relationship with recruitment and retention, is morale. And this is a key reason why people are leaving in such huge numbers at tremendous cost to defence in both financial and operational ways. The solution to many of these problems are actually fairly straightforward, but they are expensive. Properly maintained housing stock, better mental health support, better support for families when people are deployed, decent pay, all of which are out with the remit of any Commissioner. So this bill presents a welcome stride forward, but it's no silver bullet to fix life in the UK armed forces. As we've already heard, almost 60% of personnel report low morale. Only a third of personnel are satisfied with the welfare support their family receive when they return from deployment, and many personnel live in poor accommodation. And perhaps most importantly for the Commissioner, only 23% of serving personnel think leaders will take meaningful actions to improve issues identified in the Continuous Attitudes Survey report. I'll just make a little bit of progress. Not a great report card, Madam Deputy Speaker, for this or the previous government, but certainly a starter for 10 for the Commissioner, and I'll give way.
On the point that the honourable gentleman is making, and thank him for taking the intervention, would he like to welcome the 20 hours of wraparound childcare for service personnel serving overseas announced by the government this weekend, saving serving families £3,400?
Yes, I would like. What's not to like? So I'm very happy to support that. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have two questions for the Minister that I hope he'll address in his summing up. Will the Commissioner have the power to investigate challenges for serving personnel within the nuclear enterprise, or will personnel in this service have to continue to suffer in secret? And, Madam Deputy Speaker, Scotland, as usual, is out in front with our Veterans Commissioner. So what learnings will the UK Commissioner for Serving Personnel be able to take from their Scottish counterpart? And how does the Minister envisage that they'll work together going forward? And moreover, given that Wales and Northern Ireland also have a Veterans Commissioner, and that this Commissioner will not have responsibility across the United Kingdom for veterans, what is the time frame for veterans in England enjoying the same benefits as those in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland? Thank you.
I call Alison Hume to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is an honour to be called to make my maiden speech during this important debate. I would like to pay tribute to the Armed Forces personnel and veterans who live in the Scarborough and Whitby constituency. Each year in Scarborough, the town honours their sacrifice and service on Armed Forces Day. The splendid parade marches past Scarborough Lifeboat Station, where this year the RNLI celebrated 200 years of service. Back in 1861, a massive storm destroyed nearly 200 ships off the east coast. At Whitby Lifeboat Station, Henry Freedman was the only volunteer to survive the disaster, thanks to the new design of life jacket he was wearing, made from strips of cork sewn into a canvas vest. Incredible designs are in the weft and weave of Whitby. Twice a year, Whitby Goth Weekend welcomes thousands of well-dressed goths who paint the town red and purple and black. Goths regularly enquire whether Dracula is buried in Whitby Abbey or the churchyard. He's not. In fact, Dracula was the relatively recent creation of Bram Stoker, a Victorian theatre manager and author who found inspiration for his blood-sucking vampire when he stayed in Whitby, travelling there on the newly developed railway. Our railways are still associated with horror stories, but today it's more about nightmare journeys. I would like to pay tribute to my predecessors, Sir Robert Goodwill and Laurie Quinn, for their work to improve local connectivity. Sir Robert served our constituency for 19 years. He dedicated himself to giving a stronger voice to people who struggled to be heard and helped improve the lives of many residents, particularly in land management, local healthcare and road safety. I would like to place on record my sincere thanks on behalf of the community for his long years of faithful service and would like to wish him and his wife Maureen a happy retirement. Yeah. His Labour predecessor, Laurie Quinn, is fondly remembered by constituents, particularly for helping to secure the award-winning Coastliner bus with its magnificent views. And after the announcement today, we can look forward to more better buses in Scarborough and Whitby. Opposite Scarborough Station stands the Stephen Joseph Theatre, the theatrical home of one of our finest living playwrights, Sir Alan Ayckbourn, the jewel in our creative crown. Our stunning constituency covers 285 square miles. The beauty of our sweeping coastline and purple-top moors has been captured in many television dramas and films. Goathland sits in the heart of the glorious North Yorkshire Moors National Park, with a station on the pretty Esk Valley Railway. It has doubled both as Aidensfield Station in Heartbeat and Hogsmeade Station, from where Harry Potter catches a steam train to his school for wizards. And whilst we're on wizardry, I'd like to thank the House of Commons staff for making us freshers feel so welcome. And especially for not laughing as I circled endlessly through the various lobbies, absolutely convinced that, just as with Hogwarts, nothing ever seems to be in the same place as it was the time before. Madam Deputy Speaker, talented young people in coastal towns surely deserve the same opportunities in the creative industries as their peers in the cities. I will work hard to bring these opportunities to Scarborough and Whitby and to attract investment for training and skills in the industries of the future. At their headquarters in Scarborough, Alexander Dennis, formerly Plaxton's, are leading the way with their innovative electric buses. We are also uniquely positioned to benefit from the vast wind farms being built off our coast, but we must move quickly to ensure our towns can service the green energy industry. As the turbines turn, we need to take care that our fragile but precious inshore fishing industry is supported into a sustainable future. Our fishing towns and villages serve up so much more than the best fish and chips in the country. We have a delicious combination of tradition and innovation. Herrings are still smoked traditionally by 5 generations of the Fortune family to produce the famous Whitby kippers, which my late father adored. As the lobster export capital of Europe, Yorkshire is indebted to the parents and carers of thousands of baby lobsters being nurtured at the Whitby Lobster Hatchery. Scarborough is the country's frozen chip capital, home to McCain Foods, as well as Seagrown, the first seaweed farm in Europe. As for our traditional farmers, I understand that this is a difficult time for you. I was delighted to visit Low Yedmondale and Spikers Hill farms outside of Scarborough recently to better understand the challenges faced by our family farms. Times are tough for far too many constituents. I'd like to thank the numerous organisations and charities dedicated to making lives better. The Gallows Close Centre, the Rainbow Centre, Westway Open Arms, Flowergate Hall, the Eastside Community Centre, Closer Communities, Dalewood Trust, Wish, and many others too numerous to mention. I am honoured to represent such a resilient and hard-working community. I believe we are a good fit. My late mother was born into poverty in Hull. Under a Labour government, she was able to retrain for free as a mature student to become a primary school teacher, a job she loved. My son Edward was born with complex disabilities. Under a Labour government, we benefited from the huge investment which went into health, education and schemes like Sure Start. At 25, Edward has finally achieved his dream of going to university and today is watching his mum achieve hers. Under this Labour government, I will play my part as we lift more children out of poverty, address the crisis in special educational needs and disabilities provision, and improve life for paid and unpaid carers. I truly hope I can repay the trust my constituents have put in me. In closing, as the first ever woman to represent Scarborough and Whitby, I pledge to play my part in our government's mission to halve violence against women and girls. As a proud graduate of the Jo Cox Women in Leadership Scheme, I hope to honour Jo's memory. I can see her coat of arms from where I stand. She may not have sat on this side, but she left a legacy which ensured hundreds more women like me will sit here in the future.
I call Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's indeed a real pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady for Scarborough and Whitby. I understand with a name like Hume you must have some Northern Irish ancestry, I presume you have anyway. But it's a real pleasure for me to follow the Honourable Lady, congratulate her on an absolutely superb, excellent maiden speech and her contribution. Our new constituency constituents will be extremely proud of of our contribution today, and we very much look forward to a whole lot more for the future as well. I have to say I have a special interest in Whitby and Scarborough, simply because it's a heartbeat territory. I'm of that generation, can remember all those 60s songs, and that's probably the reason why I started to watch it. But it's a real pleasure to hear the Honourable Lady and I knew the Honourable Gentleman who served before her. And I know that he will be equally pleased as the rest of us are to be here as well. Thank you, Madam Deputy, for allowing me to participate in today's debate. I declare an interest, as it's duty of myself to do. I served in the Ulster Defence Regiment for 3 years and 11.5 years in the Royal Artillery Territorial Army. And I'm invested, as we all are who have served in the forces before, and those who haven't served in the forces are all invested in this legislation we have coming before us tonight. I'm minded of all those tens of thousands and probably tens and tens of thousands of people who have served in the armed forces in Northern Ireland. I also welcome the fact that this will apply to Northern Ireland, and the Minister, and I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place, and just say this, I'm not giving the Minister a big head, but just say this: whenever we have something that the Minister brings to this chamber, he always asks us for our opinion and our contribution, and that means a lot to us as MPs. And just to say that, and it's the honest way of doing things, and I thank the Minister for doing that. The Secretary of State referred to earlier on that this was landmark legislation. It is today, and I think every one of us would greatly welcome it. So when it comes to something which we in Northern Ireland, by the way, don't take for granted when it comes to our armed forces, and what appears to be an appeasement of those who hate those armed forces in Northern Ireland, can I commend, and just for the record, one of the councillors from my constituency of Strangford, it's Councillor Trevor Cummins. He's the Veterans Champion for Ards and North Down Council, does great work, is very interested in army issues, and also those for the police as well, and is a real champion at Ards and North Down Council for this. So he will welcome, as I do welcome, this legislation before us tonight, and we look forward to it being implemented in Northern Ireland to the same extent as it is here. I'm very pleased to see that this respected access to armed forces personnel support will be available, unlike the military covenant, which my party had to fight to see implemented in any form for our veterans in the past, and for too long veterans in Northern Ireland had been treated as second-class citizens. Same for simply doing their duty, and it is my hope that this signals a new approach to veterans in Northern Ireland. I think, to be fair to the Minister, in the question that I asked the Honourable Gentleman in questions earlier on, he came back with a very positive answer, and perhaps maybe at the end, if he doesn't mind, for this debate and for I've asked the questions, perhaps maybe we can have the same recorded and answered for the purpose of assuring people back home. I'd like clarity as how the Commissioner will ensure those serving in all parts of the United Kingdom are treated equitably in the exercise of this new Commissioner's functions. I'm quite sure, and indeed I got the positivity from the Minister in the answer to the question I asked earlier. Given Northern Ireland's disproportionate contribution to the reserve forces, we would have a particular interest in ensuring that the Commissioner provides an effective outlet for those members of our armed forces and their families, and it's very important we have that. So how will the Commissioner's remit interact with the Armed Forces Covenant that was there before, which there was some difficulty with, but I'm really encouraged by what we have before us tonight. The Commissioner on this bill, and when it comes back for the third reading, as it will hopefully in the very short time, we'll be able to again welcome that. I was pleased to see within the King's speech the recognition of gratitude that is owed to those who have sacrificed for our freedom and liberty, and now today we're here to scrutinise the outworking of that gratitude. And in my opinion, it is not extravagant or groundbreaking as it should always have been, a proper service delivered to those whose quality of life has been impacted due to their service. I know, as many in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, know too many veterans whose internal scars from service have precluded them from keeping relationships with their families, from keeping steady jobs, from building friendships with others who simply can't understand what they've been through, For many of those proud men and women, they would never apply for help or support and never complain about the lack of support and help that they have received. And I welcome the fact that the family can now advocate for the veteran through this commissioner, and that definitely is a massive step forward as well, and indeed for the entire family unit. So it's good news when we consider those things. These are real positives. We've seen the difficulties before, we can see the positives going forward, so it's really, really good. It will be my hope that the role of the Armed Forces Commissioner will ensure that veterans have an accessible route to support that will skip through the red tape and arrive at a sensible approach. And if that's what this does, then again, that's what we want to see. It is important that where complaints are being processed by the new Armed Forces Commissioner and a serving member retires or leaves service whilst a complaint is still active, that there is an effective transfer of those issues to the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner. And for example, and maybe the Minister might tell us just where that fits in with the process going forward. A joined up approach is important, and I was seeking assurance that this will be the case. The Veterans Minister is not in this place, but I know he will be back shortly, and I've invited him, as the Minister already knows, to come to my constituent in Northern Ireland. I'm going to speak now, if I can, very quickly, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to Beyond the Battlefield Veterans Centre in Portafogie in my constituency of Strangford. The Minister knows it well, the Veterans Minister knows it well as well, and he will be coming, hopefully, sometime in the very near future for that visit. What does it do? Because that's one of the things I want to speak about, if I can, very quickly. It was built and designed with short-term veterans' respite in mind, a place for veterans and their families to come to have a break away with counselling services available, as well as enjoying the peace and the restful environment of the incomparable Ards Peninsula, where I just happen to live. But nonetheless, the Veterans Centre is excellent. This centre is up and running with Harbour House, providing shelter to ex-service personnel who may be homeless or suffering from post-traumatic stress. They do a truly excellent job, and for that we're very, 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 very grateful. The project has seen the transformation of a once derelict building into a dedicated veteran centre by Beyond the Battlefield, a charity which helps serving and retired members of the ex-service community. They provide practical help, Madam Deputy Speaker, and advice surrounding issues such as PTSD, war pensions, benefits, housing, medals, funerals. I've been very pleased, privileged and honoured to work alongside them and help many of the veterans how we can collectively help as we move forward to help their lives get better. Entering Harbour House, veterans come into a welcoming reception area with tea, coffee making facilities with 10 bedroom en-suites as well. They are doing a phenomenal job. They have plans and action. I know that the Veterans Minister will be coming, and certainly one of the questions we'll be asking, Madam Deputy Speaker, will to be about the extension. In the previous government, they had hoped to provide some funding, and it's not always about coming cap in hand, if you don't mind me saying. It's about what we can do better and add to what we have in place. Those 10 en-suites are full all the time. They can do another extension upstairs, which will increase that to 20, and that will be filled as well, because we in Northern Ireland have a commitment to service. Many of us over the years have served. Whenever we didn't need conscription in Northern Ireland, because you always were able to get volunteers, we always did. So when the Minister comes, we'll be trying to show the Right Honourable Member what we're doing at Beyond the Battlefield. They're doing a phenomenal job. Have a coffee shop which is open to the public, which helps to meet the needs which are well supported. But the fact is that central funding is severely lacking. This is the only veterans respite centre in Northern Ireland. The only one there is. The importance of it can't be underlined. It serves and looks after veterans from the 6 counties and indeed probably further afield. But they can't secure funding but rely on charitable fundraising, which is why, if you want a cup of coffee or a meal, what they do down at the Harbour Centre for Beyond the Battlefield is very, very commended for their food. There's a scope for more rooms to be created and more good work to be done. It is my hope that the installation of this Armed Forces Commissioner tonight in this chamber, endorsed by everybody, supported by everybody, because it's the right thing to do. It will be the best for everyone across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It will provide a greater focus on the needs of our armed forces and veterans, and that support for projects such as this will, I believe, naturally flow from what happens tonight. That's my belief, Madam Deputy Speaker. I conclude with this, Madam Deputy Speaker, and say to the Honourable Lady in particular, thank you for setting the scene for this young man to come forward and make a contribution in the chamber, because you're the star, I'm just a follower. As most of us in this House attended our remembrance services last week, we are all aware of the debt that is owed not simply to those who have their lives in the World War, but to those who have served from the guerrilla warfare from Afghanistan to Armagh, from Erbil to Enniskillen. This debt is not paid in one day with the recitation of a poem, and that's not been disrespectful. It is living and breathing, and I do hope at the creation of this post, and convinced it will breathe fresh air into the obligation that we owe to those who offered their all for us. Thank you.
I call Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by congratulating my right honourable friend, the member of Scarborough and Whitby, for her excellent and evocative speech. I remember those sweeping coastlines and the purple-top moors as I used to fly over them in my RAF C-130, and she will be an excellent advocate for her community and for all those that come up behind you in Joe Cox's behind her in Joe Cox's foundation. Madam Deputy Speaker, our forces can only defend our country effectively if the bonds of trust between service people and leaders are strong. I welcome the Government's action on the manifesto to commitment to establishing the Armed Forces Commissioner and fixing the complaint system that has been broken for so many years. This action is urgently needed. Confidence in the service complaint system remains low, despite the work that the Service Complaints Ombudsman has done. And as we know, the Ombudsman herself has concluded that the system does not operate in an efficient, effective or fair way, and has done so every year for the last 8 years. I ask, in what other area of public life would such a situation be sustained and sustained failure be allowed to persist? There are some fundamental issues that need to be addressed as well, which go beyond the performance standards on individual complaints. I would argue that the biggest problem with the current system is that it individualises complaints and encourages mediation in each instance. In my own experience, this can result in abusive or incompetent individuals remaining in place and perpetuating harm over many years, even though they have many, many complaints against them. Surely we can learn the lessons from the Whitby case, police disciplinary cases and other similar cases from very public systemic failures over recent years. We need the Commissioner to be empowered to seek out the bigger picture and the pattern behind some of these individual complaints and escalate them proportionally. As we know, it is often only a small number of individuals who are wreaking enormous damage, not only with their many victims, but on the organisations as a whole, because of the hostile and discriminatory environment that they can create. Only if we have systems that can proactively identify patterns of behaviour and root out abusers will we be able to actually deliver a safer and fairer place for everyone in our forces community. Madam Deputy Speaker, we also need the Commissioner's work to form a normal part of service life. As we know, service people rarely want to be seen as a whistleblower. Rightly or wrongly, many don't want to go outside the system due to perceptions of letting forces down. So we need to be absolutely clear that when someone communicates with the Commissioner about their experiences, they are staying within the armed forces community and acting in the best interests of all of our armed forces. But at the same time, we need people to have the confidence that their communities will be secure and they will be protected from any possibility of reprisal. So I hope the Minister will be able to tell us more about how the Government sees the role of the communications of their communications with the Commissioner in comparison with whistleblowing in civilian life. I wonder if it might be necessary to set out the protections that are relevant to service complaints within this bill to bring clarity about this. Madam Deputy Speaker, improving the complaint system can only be effective if we can address the experiences of every part of our armed forces community, including women in our armed services, service personnel from ethnic minority backgrounds, non-UK passport holders and the LGBT+ service personnel. As we know, there is troubling evidence of differential treatment for service personnel from these backgrounds. It is vitally important, that we address these in the interests of fairness to ensure our forces are more representative of the communities they serve and to address ongoing issues of recruitment and retention. This bill surely represents the opportunity to effect change, so I'd be grateful for anything the Minister can set out about how he expects the Commissioner to be able to establish connections with these communities and work with them proactively to gain an understanding of what's required. Madam Deputy Speaker, equally, the Commissioner's work needs to be representative of a wider armed forces community beyond regular service personnel. Service families are clearly critical to many of the Commissioner's functions, but I hope that it is made completely clear that the bereaved are equally deserving of our continuing support if they wish it. And the Royal British Legion have rightfully pointed out the relevance of the Haythorne-Thwaite Review and its central recommendation to move towards a fluid spectrum of service where people can move easily between regulars and the reserves. Working towards this will surely require action from the Commissioner to ensure that the needs of reservists and recruits are also being met. Finally, I want to welcome the Government's ongoing work to meet our further manifesto commitment to put the Armed Forces Covenant into law. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am mindful of the cross-departmental nature of many of the issues that affect service personnel, and this is something that is rightfully made explicit in the Covenant. I wonder if, as this bill progresses, we should be considering setting out the relationship between the Commissioner and the Cabinet Office to give a clear point of contact within the Government and a way to easily escalate complaints which are impacted by cross-government working. Surely it would be best to future-proof this bill, ensuring that the Commissioner's structures fit with the Covenant from the outset, although I accept that the Department's thinking about the best legal form for the Armed Forces Covenant may not yet be complete. I wonder if the Minister can set out any early thoughts on this. Ultimately, this bill represents very welcome action from the Government to give the people who keep us safe more of an effective guarantee of safety and fair and decent treatment in return. It is equally welcome that we are learning from our European partners about the design of this institution and placing emphasis on transparency and accountability to Parliament. My hope is that this bill will form part of a wider shift in how the armed forces community works to deliver on the promise of defence as a career of service that is truly rewarding. If we can achieve this, our country will be safer for it. Thank you.
I call Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must declare an interest and a huge sense of pride in taking part in this debate. I have cousins who serve in the Army, the Royal Air Force and a son in the Royal Navy, all of whom are under 30, and hopefully because of this bill it will be the start of a long and successful armed forces career. Yeah. And because my constituency of Portsmouth North is the home of the Royal Navy, and I'm glad the Honourable Gentleman from Plymouth is not here to argue this. Madam Deputy Speaker, the other one here, but you are. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to be a part of a mission-led government, but as the Secretary of State said earlier, no mission from a Labour government is complete without it being the first duty to keep our country safe. Peace and security are hard-earned and require constant vigilance and a well-staffed and, dare I say and aspire to say, a happy armed forces workforce. The bill today is groundbreaking in its mission as it sets out to put 183,000 service personnel and their family at its heart. It provides the opportunity and the authority for an independent commissioner to investigate welfare complaints not only from those serving, but from their families too. It also allows the opportunity and the authority to horizon scan, to highlight trends, to visit our bases, to listen to personnel, their families, and when needed, launch investigations and ultimately improve the world of work and the lives of those who so often put this country first. I welcome the whole House's stance and the cross-party working commitment to this bill. This real change cannot come quick enough. Attrition rates continue to grow and morale amongst our service personnel continues to plummet. At the moment, recruitment is outstripped by those leaving. Retention is a real issue and concern. And it's upsetting, Madam Deputy Speaker, that despite 81% of our service personnel feeling supported by their families and their colleagues, almost 50% do not feel that their families and their family life is supported by the service. Impact on family and personnel life remains the top factor influencing those leaving the services. And it would be remiss of me not to note in speaking to my constituencies in Portsmouth the concerns around armed forces housing is very high. And with 3/4 of our personnel living in service accommodation, it is vital to be able to hear the voice of those serving and their families and to use this to improve housing, communities, childcare and the lives of our forces and their families. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is serious about keeping our country safe and making our armed services a priority. With a pay rise already awarded, with an announcement on childcare provision already announced, and with a new cyber route and the cutting of red tape for recruitment, and now today a bill providing an armed forces champion, putting real voices, real experiences at its centre. It is a step to building back that eroded trust and pride. And as I do when my son returns from sea, we as a government are putting our arms around service personnel and their families. Madam Deputy Speaker, it will not be easy and it will not be quick. Issues will be uncovered that will be uncomfortable and possibly costly. Cultures may need to change. The Secretary of State will be presented with reports and independent investigations, and in Parliament we will need to address these issues. Success or failure will be measured and voiced, as it should be. Will the Minister commit, however, however difficult the outcomes, however difficult the reports, and however difficult the words that we hear from our service personnel, that we will commit to having a truly independent commissioner, and that they will, so that our armed services feel they have the trust to go to them. Because in delivering this bill into law, we will not only say, but show that our actions, however much valued, our service and dedication for armed service and personnel and their families are.
Pam Cox. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency of Colchester is proud home to the 16 Air Assault Brigade Combat Team, and the garrison and the wider community is home to many serving personnel and their families. And we know that the men and women in our armed services serve our nation so proudly, put their lives at risk to defend the freedoms on which we all hold dear. And I'd like here to pay a personal tribute to my own father-in-law, nephew and other members of my extended family who have served and serve today. I was proud to stand on a manifesto that committed to establishing an independent Armed Forces Commissioner to improve service life for our forces and the families who support them. And here I'd like to pay tribute to my mother-in-law, who, for all that she did on that score. This bill delivers on that promise. The last government hollowed out and underfunded our armed forces, and the extra £2.9 billion announced in the budget puts us back on the path of investment in our defences and our defence workforce. So I'm very pleased that the Armed Forces Commissioner will be a direct point of contact for serving personnel and their families. The Commissioner will be able to raise issues which impact service life, everything including access to good quality housing to childcare. And I know that Army families in Colchester provide so much support for each other, but they often feel that they don't get the support that they deserve, and that needs to change. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the last Labour government introduced the Armed Forces Covenant, and I welcome this government's commitment to fully incorporating that covenant into law. In Colchester, we are supported by so many great organisations, such as the Army Benevolent Fund, SAFA, regimental charities such as Support Our Paras, and I want to thank them for the work that they do, and I would like to see the new Commissioner working hard with them and closely with them. I'm also pleased that this bill supports other wider changes that the government's already making to support our veterans, and that point was made earlier by members opposite. We've already delivered on our manifesto commitments to make the Veterans ID card an accepted form of voter ID. We've acted to improve veterans' access to secure, healthy homes, and we've invested £3.5 million in additional funding for veterans' homelessness support programmes. So this government's absolutely committed to the welfare of veterans. So to close, I'm delighted that this Labour government is introducing the Armed Forces Commissioner post. Elsewhere, I've written about commissioner roles and compared them in terms of their powers, and I'm hoping that this one will be as strong as the strongest of the rest. If so, that commissioner will be a strong independent voice for our forces in Colchester and elsewhere across the country, committed to improving service life, and I support this bill wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to echo other members that have said how nice it is to hear so many servicemen and women in this House and so many members who represent service communities being collectively behind this bill. Just over a week ago, we observed Remembrance Sunday, a solemn day to honour the courage, dedication and sacrifice of our armed forces. This annual act of remembrance is a poignant reminder of the immense debt of gratitude that we owe those who serve. It is therefore fitting that in the same month the Government has introduced the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill. It rightly recognises that improving the lives of service personnel and their families is not only a moral duty, but a necessity if we are to recruit and retain the people that we need. Over the past decade, our armed forces have faced significant challenges, compounded by underfunding and a series of cuts. Research has laid bare the reality. Optimism of the armed forces has reached record lows, and recruitment and retention are in a state of crisis. Annual surveys of service personnel consistently reveal high levels of dissatisfaction with service life. Nearly 60% report low morale, and less than half express satisfaction with their service experience. These figures speak volumes about the pressing need for reform and meaningful change. And I know how bad it has become because I come from a service family. I grew up living on an RAF base, and I followed my dad and brother into the armed forces. In recent years, we've all seen the deterioration in the experience of service life, with the state of accommodation in particular being a huge problem. My brother, for example, in his last house, after 20 years' service in the Royal Air Force, was expected to live in accommodation that had rising damp and sewage leaking into part of the premises. His family, with a young daughter, was expected to live in a house with black mould and broken plumbing. I think it's unacceptable, and we wouldn't expect prisoners to live like this, and we should not be expecting our brave servicemen and women and their families to live in conditions like we're seeing there. And I've spoken to so many people in my constituency and elsewhere that have a similar story. Poor housing and a lack of action by those that have responsibility, which is why it is so important to have an Armed Forces Commissioner to advocate on behalf of service personnel, like my brother, when their voices go unheard. This Commissioner will provide a powerful and independent voice for service personnel and the families who support them. They will report directly to Parliament, ensuring accountability and transparency in addressing the needs and concerns of those who serve. And the framework will give service personnel confidence that their voices are heard, their issues are taken seriously, and they have robust advocate working on their behalf. Every year we stand together as a nation to pay tribute to those who have given their lives in service to our country. But this tribute must go beyond words and ceremonies. It must be matched by concrete actions from the politicians entrusted to represent their interests. As a veteran, I understand how deeply service shapes not only those who serve, but their families. And I am proud to stand here today, both as an MP and as a former Royal Marine, to lend my full support to this bill at the second reading. This legislation is a step in the right direction, a step towards ensuring every member of our armed forces knows their sacrifices are valued and they're supported by a system designed to protect their interests and those of their families. For too long, these needs have gone unmet. This bill is an opportunity to change that.
I call Graham Downey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I also begin by welcoming all of the contributions from all sides of this House, and it's been a remarkably cross-party consensual debate from all sides so far, and I'm sure will continue. Unlike some who have spoken, my family do not have a veteran. However, I did grow up for 3.5 years on an RAF base in Berlin, subject to something which was called the Berlin budget, which actually ensured that adequate housing was not a problem, thanks to the taxpayers in Berlin. And it is interesting to me, of course, that this is modelled on a German position which exists, always something which I would welcome in a country which I have a great feeling for. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a pleasure to speak in the debate this afternoon, as this Labour Government does continue at pace to put in place some more of the many commitments made to my constituents and others in our manifesto. This Government has already taken action to stabilise our economy, unleash investment and to reform the House of Lords. For Scotland, the recent budget saw a record £3.4 billion of additional funding, a pay rise for 200,000 Scots and many other benefits besides. In defence, as others have mentioned, the Government has increased pay for our armed forces and delivered an extra £2.5 billion for the defence budget on top of the £3 billion annually for Ukraine for as long as it will take to defeat Vladimir Putin. The bill we are considering today will help protect those serving in our armed forces and their families, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in the Dunfermline and Dollar region and the wider part of Fife, we have a proud heritage of military families both serving and in veterans' communities. From the Royal Navy and dockyards at Rosyth in my own constituency to the former RAF base at Lookers, which is now being used by the Army, the existing RAF base at Lossiemouth, the nuclear deterrent on the Clyde and training grounds for the commandos and special forces units throughout the Highlands. Dunfermline, Fife and Scotland know a lot about what is needed to support soldiers and their families, which is why I welcome this bill today. Forces families, Madam Deputy Speaker, face long periods apart, frequent moves, educational changes, housing issues that have already been mentioned, inconsistent access to healthcare and sometimes even different tax arrangements within the UK. The nature of the military itself, with the vital and necessary chain of command, can lead, and in the past has led, to a more closed shop and the development of toxic and unhelpful practices and cultures. While there are issues that's been covered today that must continue to be dealt with by the chain of command, because the role of serving personnel often does mean that families must follow them around, there must also be a route which allows them to raise broader issues of concern, something this bill will achieve with an Armed Forces Commissioner. As the others have mentioned, we must ensure that living conditions are appropriate for our armed forces personnel, both with their families and when apart. It is absolutely not right and not acceptable to expect our armed forces to live in inadequate housing, not just from a health perspective, but something which is not conducive to modern family life. I was speaking to veterans in my community recently, and they said that sometimes just access to adequate Wi-Fi is something that they would welcome so they can keep in touch with their families when they are abroad. On a related matter, I strongly welcome the announcement by the Prime Minister and the actions of the Government in the Homes for Hero commitment, and I thank my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State and his ministerial team for the rigour which I know they are applying to its implementation. I do wish we would see more action on this, particularly in Scotland with the SNP, where I would like to see a much more committed approach to services for our armed forces and for our veterans. If we do not begin to address some of these issues quickly and directly, and with a highly competitive career market that we face, it is only going to make it harder and harder to recruit and to retain armed forces personnel. In an ever more unstable world, we must ensure that UK armed forces are an attractive employer not only for the front line, but for the thousands of essential staff who might otherwise choose to work in the private sector in sectors such as logistics or technology. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must ensure that bullying, harassment and discrimination are driven from our armed forces at all levels. Not only is that the right thing to do, not only is that how we make the armed forces an attractive and responsive employer, not only is that how we build and maintain morale, not only is that how we recruit and retain staff, but, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's how we ensure our armed forces are able and ready to fight when we need them to. The kind of independent role this bill seeks to establish offers the possibility to create an effective and independent process that will provide people with the confidence that they can raise these concerns and see an established and transparent process for how they will be investigated and addressed quickly and effectively. I do not welcome the future position of ministers when they must respond to some of these reports, as I do believe it is going to lay bare some of the challenges that have been allowed to build up over years and decades. But face them we will, and face them we must. Madam Deputy Speaker, just in closing, I would like to ask the Minister, when he's responding in particular, as has been mentioned by other members on all sides, how it is intended that the Commissioner will work with the devolved administrations, but also how they will work with the devolved local authorities inside those administrations as well, where we have another layer of government we must make sure does not fail local authorities. I'm thinking particularly here, of course, in Scotland. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's been a long time for a Parliament and Government that recognises and addresses the different lives lived by our armed forces and their families. It should be no surprise that once again it's taken a Labour Government to take the necessary action to protect our armed forces.
I call Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I spoke in the House to commend the Secretary of State's introduction of the bill as a promise made and a promise fulfilled. It delivers on this Government's manifesto commitment to strengthen the support of our armed forces communities, and as a Scottish Labour Member of Parliament, I'm proud to speak in support of it today. It represents this new Government's determination to renew the contract between the nation and those who serve and protect our country. And I know this Government will always stand up for our armed forces, and that's why it has already confirmed the largest pay rise for personnel in 20 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, at its core, this bill is about ensuring our brave men and women in uniform are properly supported, protected and treated with the dignity and respect they deserve throughout their whole careers. Our armed forces are an essential part of the fabric of our national life, both in Scotland and across the UK as a whole. And that's brought to life in my own constituency, Livingston, as the home of the Military Museum of Scotland in Wilkinson. It's a fantastic award-winning museum that covers the Scottish military history from World War I to the present day. West Lothian is also the home to the ASA Scotland charity, a wonderful charity with Bathgate councillor Harry Cartmill as its chairman and founding member. ASA prioritises the education of local armed forces history, working with schools, communities, veterans, families and serving personnel to show the importance of our armed forces in our communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, from the Scottish regiments that have served with distinction on the battlefields across the world, to present-day personnel based in Livingston constituency, towns and cities across Scotland, our servicemen and women stand ready and willing to defend our way of life. They should not only have to defend, they not only serve our country, but they also embody the values that we hold dear: duty, loyalty, sacrifice and service. Yet too often we hear the struggles faced by service members, such as difficulties of accessing mental health services, to issues with accommodation or childcare. The creation of this Armed Forces Commissioner represents a significant step forward in addressing those challenges. A strong independent champion for those service personnel and their families, the Commissioner must be a direct point of contact for them to raise issues which impact the service life. And not only will there be a voice of concerns for serving families, they will hold government, any government, including this one, and as many members have said, I think it shows real leadership in this area that we're willing to put that on the line to make sure that every year we have to respond to those challenges. Now, I know this bill has the support of the service personnel of Royal British Legion and of Poppy Scotland, and the feedback from Germany on establishment and functioning of a similar role indicates the strong support for those service personnel of that independent Commissioner. Now, this Labour Government is a champion of our armed forces, as all Labour governments have been before it. It's the Government's first duty to national service and to defence of our country, and that includes the duty of care who take up that burden. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the new Armed Forces Commissioner must have those powers needed to investigate complaints, to scrutinise the Government's actions and to ultimately provide meaningful recommendations for action. This bill is therefore a commitment to ensuring the welfare of Armed Forces personnel is not an afterthought, but an ongoing priority, day in, day out. It's a recognition of the need for a long-term vision for a better future for our forces, and I believe the establishment of this Commissioner will help us build a military that is not only strong in its purpose, but strong in the support for the individuals that serve in it too.
Jonathan Brash.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I start by saying how humbling it is to share these benches with those who have served our country. You add far more to this debate than I could ever hope to, and it is a genuine honour to have heard so many of you speak today. Our armed forces are too small. In the current geopolitical climate, it's a fact that's undeniable. In this era of unprecedented global uncertainty, we must ask ourselves a fundamental question. Are our defence capabilities sufficient to protect our nation, uphold our values and fulfil our obligations to our allies. Russia's brutal aggression in Ukraine has made one thing clear: conventional warfare is not a relic of the past. It is a clear and present danger to our future. And regardless of the decisions made by our closest ally, the United States, in the coming months, the UK must urgently stand ready to act with our allies. We must assert our position as a key strategic player in global security. And to achieve this, we need a solid foundation for the expansion of our military capabilities. And that begins with addressing the challenges of recruitment and retention. Since 2011, we have missed our recruitment targets in every year but one. This bill is critical to solving this crisis and arresting the decline. Fundamentally, this bill seeks to strengthen advocacy and accountability, establishing an independent figure dedicated to addressing issues faced by service members, including housing, healthcare, mental health and family support. The Commissioner will have new powers to proactively investigate systemic problems rather than simply reacting to the scandals as they emerge, such as issues of housing that we've heard so much about today. By holding decision makers accountable, the Commissioner will drive improvements that make military life more attractive to both current personnel and potential recruits. And make no mistake, the passing of this bill and the creation of this role will and should make the lives of decision makers more difficult, as they are rightly challenged at every turn to do better by our armed forces. This proactive approach will enhance trust and transparency, creating a real sense that service members' concerns are heard and acted upon. The Armed Forces Commissioner will provide a direct point of contact for personnel and their families, ensuring their voices shape the future of military life. But this bill is part of a broader effort by this government to honour the men and women of our armed forces. And so I welcome the wraparound childcare for military families deployed overseas, a measure that recognises the sacrifices that service families make. I welcome that after years of real terms pay cuts, we have seen the biggest pay rise in 22 years delivered by this Labour government, as a critical and much needed break from the recent past. And I welcome the Armed Forces Covenant being fully enshrined into law to ensure that those who serve and their families are treated with fairness and respect. I speak to countless Hartlepool veterans who have told me that far too many public services, whether it's GP practices, dentists, housing providers or other, pay only lip service to that covenant. This must change. And finally, I commend the Prime Minister's commitment to Homes for Heroes, an initiative to end the disgrace of veteran homelessness. They must be at the front of the queue if we are to honour their service to our country. In an uncertain world, we must expand our armed forces, but we can only succeed by renewing our country's contract with those who serve and who have served, supporting them and their families. An independent advocate for service personnel, a real terms pay rise, a tangible support for veterans, and not just policies. These are the patriotic foundations of a stronger, more secure future. Thank you.
Peter Swallow.
Speaker. As the MP for Sandhurst, I'm very proud to represent the home of the RMA at Sandhurst, where every British Army officer starts their journey of service. And I think it's important to reflect, Madam Deputy Speaker, that service has not, in recent years, necessarily been repaid by us. I'm alarmed that only 4 in 10 service personnel are satisfied with service life. And the fact that the armed forces is shrinking due to a recruitment and retention crisis should worry us all. And with that in mind, I warmly welcome the establishment of the Armed Forces Commissioner and welcome this as part of the government's overall plans to renew the nation's contract with those who serve us. It is vitally important that the Armed Forces Commissioner is independent. And I noted with interest the contribution made by my honourable friend, the member for Slough, the chair of the Defence Select Committee, on this point. Although also noted the view of my honourable friend, for the member for Plymouth Moorview, that really the overwhelming proof of this independence will be whether the Armed Forces Commissioner is in a position to shine a light on welfare matters, to address issues of culture, and to raise quality of service life. The proof, as they say, will be in the pudding. And on this note, it is welcome that they will be able to bring their reports to Parliament for us to scrutinise. And it's also vitally important that this role is a powerful voice for service families too, because so often those who serve are constrained by the lack of support for those who support them in their important role. And I also welcome the proactive investigatory powers of the Armed Forces Commissioner. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is really welcome, but it's important to note that it's only part of a wider commitment to supporting our armed forces. Decent pay rises, including 35% more pay for recruits, 3.5 million more to support veterans facing homelessness, expanding the Veterans card as a approved form of voter ID, and digitising that as well. And really important, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the announcement this weekend of 20 hours of wraparound childcare for service personnel serving overseas, saving families £3,400. And that's really important because, as we know, too often serving members of our armed forces find that actually it's their families at home who are not given the support when they're abroad serving their country overseas. And that has to change in a modern world where in the armed forces as well as in the rest of society, two members of a household often are working. It's really important that we give that support for family care as well as for those single parents who are serving. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to reflect on the grim anniversary we face tomorrow. 1,000 days since Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. This is an important moment to reflect on the sacrifice and service we ask of our armed forces as we look to the brave service of Ukrainian soldiers facing up to the aggression of Putin's illegal war. The world is a more dangerous place. We do ask a great deal of those who serve for us, and they do so knowing that they may be asked to make the ultimate sacrifice. And with that in mind, it is vitally important that we renew our contract with those who serve us, indeed, that we serve them, as this bill is an important step in getting that right.
Juliet Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the introduction of the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, and I welcome the cross-party support for it too. The Government couldn't have introduced this bill at a more prudent time, as our service personnel have made it clear over many years that they are not getting the quality of support that they need, be it a poor response to concerns, complaints, quality of homes, or the treatment of women and other minority groups. The Ministry of Defence's most recent attitude report showed that the morale amongst service personnel had fallen by a third in 3 years in a row. Only around a third of the military personnel reported feeling valued by their service, despite the vital defence role that they play. Pay satisfaction, which last year was at its lowest recorded level, had only increased by 1%. It is time that these concerns were addressed. We know that the government has already announced the largest armed forces pay increase in 22 years, and the introduction of the Armed Forces Commissioner represents even further investment in the welfare of our forces, a vital support that is not only incredibly well deserved but long overdue. There are 10 units stationed at Chetwynd Barrack in my constituency of Broxtowe, and I know that the establishment of an Armed Forces Commissioner will transform how the concerns and needs of our Armed Forces personnel and their loved ones are addressed. In an ever-changing defence landscape, it is key that the government ensures that our armed forces have a dedicated spokesperson and advocate who will ensure that their voices are heard at the highest levels. It is time that we create an infrastructure to establish a long-needed sense of security and support within the military community. So let us move forward with this important legislation to reinforce our commitment to the welfare of our service members. Let us ensure that in doing so, that those who serve and their families are given the support that they so rightly deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, let us establish an Armed Forces Commissioner so that we can better serve those who nobly serve our country.
Sonia Kumar.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our Armistice Day was just 1 week behind us. The respect and admiration for veterans, service personnel and their families still fresh in the public consciousness. It's only fit that we speak about a bill which will improve the quality of life in service and ensure our military personnel receive the respect and support they deserve. It's widely known that our armed forces are facing record levels of low morale and a crisis in recruitment and retention, with only 4 in 10 satisfied with their service, life in service. And who can blame them? In 2022, 163 service family accommodation homes were left without heating over 5 days during the Christmas period, and only 27% of personnel were satisfied with the maintenance responses, whilst most service family accommodation is officially rated as decent. Independent reviews highlight serious issues with many families during poor repairs, and our armed forces deserve better. Addressing these issues is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It's simply unacceptable that in 2021, nearly 62% of female service personnel and veterans reported experiences of bullying, harassment, discrimination, and in rare cases, even worse. These numbers speak for themselves and our structures are currently not working. So I ask, what measures will the government use to evaluate the success of the Armed Forces Commissioner and addressing welfare issues, and how will they ensure the personnel see tangible improvements to their day-to-day lives as a result? Will the Armed Forces Commissioner have a role in overseeing the support provided to those who have served during the transition period to civilian life, ensuring welfare is not neglected? Our service personnel and their families continue to sacrifice in our name and freedom, so it's only right we provide them with the support and respect they deserve. The weekend before last, I attended a memorial service in my constituency of Dudley, and I was proud to see just how many people turned out to pay their respects and say thank you to the servicemen and women of the past and present who have given so much to our country. And in particular, I'd like to thank the people of Lower Gornal, Royal British Legion, and many dedicated veterans and volunteers who dutifully maintain our heritage, including the All Saints Church in Sedgley. As the people of Dudley pay their respect to our veterans and service personnel of the past, then it's only right we ensure that the right quality of service is given to the armed forces of the present. This bill and the creation of the Armed Forces Commissioner provides us with a crucial opportunity to address these deep-seated issues, and it's not just about improving conditions, it's about fundamentally changing the culture within our armed forces. Our servicemen and women deserve nothing else than respect, support and gratitude as all the support they've given us and the service they provide. Thank you.
Terry Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to be able to speak in support of these proposals today. Pleased for a number of reasons, but particularly because I come from a family where public service, including military service, is in our blood. A number of my family have served in our armed forces, and of particular note, my uncle, Clifford Berry, served for more than 22 years in the Royal Engineers, and that was a role that saw him complete 2 tours in Northern Ireland, as well as being posted overseas in Germany and service in the Falkland Islands. Support for armed services is rooted in the DNA of my constituency too. In the north of South West Norfolk, we are proud to host RAF Marham, home to the F-35's Lightning Squadron and 3,600 service personnel and their families. And at the other end, just outside the constituency boundary, is RAF Honington in Suffolk, home to the RAF Regiment and the Specialist Counter-Chemical, Nuclear and Biological Weapons Team. And whilst I admit the base is physically located in Suffolk, it is in my hometown of Thetford, where many of the personnel and their families are based, and where I was proud in the recent past to help grant them the freedom of the town. Nearby, we also have RAF Mildenhall and RAF Lakenheath, working alongside our friends and allies from the United States. Given this interconnected patchwork of military personnel, it is little wonder why people in my constituency are so passionate and supportive of our armed services. During the lead-up to Remembrance Day, I was proud to support local volunteers from the Royal British Legion, collecting funds as part of the Poppy Appeal. As well as the important task of raising money, I was pleased to be able to speak to so many people about why they wanted to support the RBL and what their own personal connection was to our armed forces. It was a truly honourable and enjoyable few hours, and my thanks must go to the local RBL volunteer, Heather, for hosting me. Through my role as a local councillor, however, I've seen a different side to things. I've seen how I've had to issue food bank vouchers to families of service personnel as they've struggled to make ends meet. Myself and fellow councillors have had to repeatedly complain about the state of some military housing and raise issues with mould and damp that have been impacting family health. And as the honourable friend from Hales Owen highlighted earlier, military housing is all too often ageing, it is often very poorly insulated, it is not very energy efficient, and as a result, many families are spending a disproportionate sum of money heating their homes. In some parts of Norfolk, they're paying £25 a day for their electricity. Coupled with poor insulation, they're very often given electric heaters that offer no solution. Many of these homes provide a miserable existence in winter months, drafts, cold floors, damp and mould. It's occurred to me in recent months that our shared respect and support for our armed services is not adequately reflected in our systems designed to support them. And I hope that this new Commissioner will change this. And as has been remarked by a number of members, the first duty of any government is to keep our country safe, and at the heart of that is our security. At the heart of our security are the men and women who serve and risk their lives in defence of our nation. It is worth mentioning too how the erosion of our public services more generally over the last 14 years has been impacting service personnel and their families. In my Downham Market constituency recently, a serving member of the military told me about his son who had additional needs, and as a family they were not able to find suitable education and were forced to homeschool their son. Dad was forced to work from home and he was no longer deployable, taking a very skilled operative out of the service and an unwelcome pay cut for the family. Now, I am proud that this Labour government recognises the sacrifices made not only by those in uniform, but also their families. And this new Commissioner will be a direct point of contact for serving personnel and, importantly, for their families, able to raise the full breadth of issues that impact upon service life. And the powers to proactively investigate are important, and also the access to information and to be able to visit sites, because believe me, seeing is believing when it comes to some of the issues that take place. And I must mention the member for Leyton and Wanstead, because I thought he captured this point brilliantly earlier. So often there is a culture of not wanting to speak out, to not rock the boat. And I hear so many times that military families do not want to create a fuss. The independent aspect of this role is so important, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could clarify further the independence of the Commissioner, because I'm sure that will be of great interest to people in my constituency. Safeguarding whistleblowing is important. This bill is a big step forward, and I am very happy to support it on behalf of residents of South West Norfolk.
Backbench contribution, Alex Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Establishing an Armed Forces Commissioner will make a real difference to the military families that I represent in the home of the British Army. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak in this debate and welcome this important legislation. We've heard from all sides of the House about the tremendous debt we owe to our armed forces. It's something we feel very deeply in Aldershot and Farnborough, as people from our community has served in every major conflict that our country has faced over the past 200 years. And this bill is essentially about respect, showing respect to those serving and respect for the families that support them. Because we know this isn't just about words, it's about deeds. The Armed Forces Covenant is there to ensure that those who serve and the families of those who serve are not disadvantaged by being part of our military community. But I have heard time and time again in countless conversations on doorsteps across my constituency how forces families are often automatically on the back foot when they move onto a military estate in my community. A spouse who shared with me last week about how her 3 children had been allocated to 3 different primary schools within a 7-mile radius. How is she supposed to get her children all to school on time? An all too common experience for families in my constituency. Others have told me how they've tried to use their voice to speak up about shoddy accommodation that simply isn't up to standard. But too many have been worn down and fatigued by the process, giving up hope that anything will ever change. Can I take this opportunity to pay tribute to Councillor Nadia Martin, the Armed Forces champion for Rushmore Council? Nadia is a military spouse, and she has single-handedly given so many serving families and veterans in our community a voice. We've become a lot better at supporting our armed forces and veterans because of Nadia's work, and our community owes her a huge amount of thanks. But I can tell you, for every case we know and hear about, there are many others that go unspoken and unresolved, because people are too scared to speak out for fear that it might harm their own career or their partner's career. That is why we need an independent Armed Forces Commissioner, someone who our forces can trust, who can investigate, follow up, hold government to account, and be the guiding star for this place as we renew our nation's contract with those who serve our country. And after a generation of our armed forces being neglected and run down by the Conservative government, leaving morale at a record low, we desperately need to give hope to our serving personnel. My constituents don't want the earth. They just want the basic equipment that they need to be able to do their jobs, a good life for their families, and a positive future when their time serving comes to an end. I hope this bill will move us closer to that, because if they are willing to fight for us, that is the very least we can do.
Now come to the Shadow Minister, the Right Honourable Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Shadow Armed Forces Minister, I want to begin by reiterating that we approach this bill as critical friends with a commitment to strengthening its impact for those who serve this country so bravely. Indeed, this has been a good quality debate conducted in a notably bipartisan spirit. Another sub-theme has been the benign presence of a former Royal Marine mafia who have been prevalent throughout the debate, not least from the Veterans Minister himself downwards, who, for the record, was present for the opening speeches, even though he was not allowed to contribute. We've also had a number of extremely good backbench speeches, including from the members from Plymouth Moorview, Exmouth and Exeter East, North Durham, Angus and Perthshire Glens, Strangford, Leyton and Wanstead, Portsmouth North, Colchester, Howells Owen, Dunfermline and Dollar, Livingston, Hartlepool, Bracknell, Broxtowe, Dudley, South West Norfolk, and last but not least, from the Honourable Member for Aldershot. I'm particularly indebted to the Honourable Member for Bracknell, as he mentioned that he has the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in his constituency, and there were a number of tributes paid in the debate tonight from honourable members who have relatives who serve in the armed forces. I think it's greatly to the House's credit that we have so many MPs now who have either served in the armed forces or who have loved ones. But I'm grateful to the honourable member for Bracknell because my godson, Second Lieutenant Alexander Blackwell, passed out from Sovereign's Parade at RMH Sandhurst in August and is now a Second Lieutenant commissioned into the regular army. So I am as proud of him as all other honourable members are of their family members too, and I would like to place that on the record. We also had a very accomplished maiden speech from the Honourable Member for Scarborough and Whitby. She was not only lucid and entertaining, but in my 23 years in this place, that is the first occasion I've ever known anyone get Dracula into a maiden speech. She really got her teeth into it. And more seriously, she invoked the memory of our fallen comrade, Joe Cox. And she quite rightly pointed to her plaque, which is on the wall behind me. And of course, Joe is famous for her suggestion that as members of Parliament, we have more in common than divides us. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that was absolutely the spirit of this very good debate this evening. At the core of this bill, as I'm sure the Minister will agree, lies a commitment to supporting our armed forces personnel. They deserve a system that not only honours their service, but also ensures accountability and fairness in addressing their legitimate concerns. The bill proposes a model similar to the German system, whereby the Commissioner would have what we might characterise as Ofsted-like powers, including the ability to enter military sites and access pertinent information for investigations. If executed correctly, this could enhance oversight, transparency and the lived experience of our servicemen and women, strengthening public confidence in how their issues are addressed. A truly independent, well-resourced Commissioner with the right powers could be a powerful voice for our service personnel and veterans, I'll come back to that, addressing their concerns fairly, transparently and promptly, a vision that we believe deserves cross-party support. However, there are some details in the bill that we intend to examine closely. We must ensure It truly delivers on its promises without adding unnecessary complexity to the existing oversight system. As we support the vision of the bill, we also have a duty to scrutinise how this new role will be implemented, how it will integrate into the current framework, and its implications for those already navigating the Armed Forces complaint system. In short, the challenge for ministers, I think, will be to convince Armed Forces personnel and their families that this new legislation will represent real change and not just mean replacing the nameplate outside the Office of the Servants' Complaints Ombudsman with a new one which says Armed Forces Commissioner instead. We support the vision, but the proof of the pudding really will be in the eating. I've now got some specific questions that I hope the Minister can address in his wind-up speech. First, as the Her Majesty's loyal opposition, we do hold some concerns regarding the transition process of cases that will be outstanding with the current Service Complaints Ombudsman, whose office is abolished via Clause 1 of the Bill. Some of these cases have been open for a considerable amount of time, causing both significant stress and frustration to those affected. Therefore, can the Minister explain what will happen to the many cases that are still outstanding with the current Ombudsman? Will these be transferred automatically to the new Commissioner? If so, what assurances can the Minister give this transition will not lead to further delays or the loss of critical information during the transition process which would follow royal assent? Our service personnel deserve timely resolutions. Indeed, we must avoid any risk of letting cases slip through the cracks, as it were, as part of the handover process. I hope he'll accept that's a perfectly legitimate concern. Secondly, I'd ask the Minister, what's the timeline for establishing this new Commissioner role? Does the Government expect to have the Commissioner in place by the time that the Strategic Defence Review reports in the first half of this year, which some cynics are already suggesting will be in late June 2025? So if we could have confirmation on the timeline, that would be helpful. Thirdly, coming on to financial questions, what will be the true cost of establishing and maintaining the Commissioner? Schedule 1 of the Bill states at 11.1, the Secretary of State may make payments and provide other financial assistance to the Commissioner. What budget has been allocated to the Commissioner's office in 2024-25? And will that come from the MOD budget or from the Cabinet Office? And wherever it comes from, how much money are we talking about? The figure of £5 million has been mentioned a couple of times this evening. I wonder if the Minister can confirm that. In relation to financial implications, how will this affect other essential services, especially as we know on all sides of the House defence budgets are continually stretched? Fourthly, another critical area we'd like further clarity on is the level of authority the Commissioner will hold. Will this individual have the autonomy needed to genuinely advocate for our forces without interference? That was a point stressed particularly by the chair of the Defence Select Committee in his very good contribution. How will the Commissioner interact with the role of the Defence Select Committee? Allied to that, Secretary of State in his opening speech confirmed the Defence Committee will be involved in the appointment process. If so, will the committee have a veto on proposed appointees if, for whatever reason, they have concerns they might not be suitable? It's crucial the bill brings about measurable change that's beneficial to our service personnel, and laying thematic reports before Parliament each year, as proposed in the bill, is welcomed on this side of the House. Finally, and a number of honourable members raised this, Madam Deputy Speaker, what about veterans? The bill in Clause 4 amends the Armed Forces Act 2006 to allow the Commissioner to investigate a general service welfare matter, which in the Commissioner's opinion arises in connection with the ongoing service of the person subject to service law or relevant family members. There's no direct reference to veterans, even though by definition they have served in the armed forces previously, some of them for many years. Given that veterans experience welfare matters too, not least in the payment of pensions or outstanding claims from the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme, the AFCS, is there scope for allowing the new Commissioner to take responsibility for examining these issues too? As the Royal British Legion ask in their very good briefing note on the bill, and I quote them, RBL and Poppy Scotland would like clarity on how the Armed Forces Commissioner will interact with the existing Veterans Commissioners for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland and the proposed National Veterans Commissioner. So, when the Minister sums up, can he therefore explain what the relationship will be between the new Armed Forces Commissioner and the proposed National Veterans Commissioner? And whilst they're at it, can the Minister update us on the progress with the National Veterans Commissioner too? On a related point, the well-respected Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner, Danny Kinahan, resigned recently for reasons which have not been made entirely clear. Can the Minister update the House on why he resigned and what arrangements have been put in place for his replacement? To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've outlined, the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill represents an opportunity to enhance the support and advocacy we provide to our armed forces. There is potential for the bill to address some of the most pressing issues facing service personnel today, offering a level of accountability and transparency that's essential for those who sacrifice so much in the service of our nation. But it's crucial that we get this right. We're committed to working with the Government to ensure that this bill delivers on its promise. We owe it to our armed forces to scrutinise the details thoroughly, ensuring that this legislation does not become another layer of oversight that complicates the process, but rather provides streamlined and meaningful support. By addressing the issues we've raised today, the transition of outstanding Ombudsman's cases, the urgency of the timeline, the potential costs involved, the Commissioner's authority and the scope of support for veterans, we can avoid the potential pitfalls that might otherwise arise. As we move forward and the bill enters its committee stage, we will continue to work constructively with the Government in, I hope, the same bipartisan spirit that the whole House has very clearly encouraged this evening, pushing for clarity and advocating for the changes needed to make this legislation truly impactful, as I'm sure that the Government and the Minister intend. Our forces deserve nothing less, and we stand ready to collaborate in securing a fair, accountable and effective system that upholds the highest standards for those who are serving, who have served, and their families. We thank them for their service.
And now comes the Minister, Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank all members who have spoken in this debate today. A number of members spoke about the importance of this time of year, and last week I was in the Falkland Islands representing the Government and also Falklands veterans from Plymouth to lay a wreath at the War Memorial that remembers the 255 members of UK Armed Forces who died in the 1982 conflict, and also a further wreath to remember the 49 members of our armed forces who have died subsequently in accidents and other incidents on the Falkland Islands. Remembrance is a special time of year. It is an opportunity for all of us, whatever our walk of life, to thank those who have served, to remember those people who never came home, and to offer our support for those people who came back forever changed. And I'm grateful for members on a cross-party basis for their participation in remembrance events and the support they have shown to our armed forces and veterans community. I'm also grateful for members across this House for the contributions during this debate. It has been a truly heartwarming debate to listen to because I have heard contributions from all sides of this House that have spoken about the passion, the respect, the dignity in which we hold those members of the armed forces. And I would like to thank, although I'll touch on a few of the points and questions asked during the debate, but I'd like to thank members from Stoke-on-Trent Central, South West Wiltshire, Gordon and Buchan, Slough, Plymouth Moorview, Exeter East and Exmouth, North Durham, Angus and Perthshire Glens, Scarborough and Whitby, Strangford, Leyton and Wanstead, Portsmouth North, Colchester, Hull Owen, Dunfermline and Dollar, Livingston, Hartlepool, Bracknell, Broxtowe, Dudley, South West Norfolk, Aldershot, and the contributions from the front benches from members for South Suffolk, Epsom, Ewell, and Rayleigh and Wickford. That is a tour de force of our nations and regions, and we should all be proud of the way that our armed forces are held in such regard across our country. But can I pay a special tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Hogsmeade Station, on her brilliant maiden speech, and also for her words about Jo Cox. Jo Cox inspired both in life and in death, and I hope that there will be many more brilliant women that follow in the honourable member's footsteps that will be joining these benches because of the work that Jo Cox has inspired. There's a number of issues that members from across the House have raised, and I'll be attempting, in summing up this debate, to deal with a number of those. If I don't cover all of those, I will be grateful if members could continue this debate, because this bill is important. It is important we get this right. It is important that we set the parameters for the Armed Forces Commissioner, the powers that they will have, and the role that they will have, in particular stressing the impartiality and independence of this role, because it's absolutely key. But I was struck by just how many members began their speeches with an assessment of where we are now. I think the member for Aldershot described personnel feeling worn down. The member for Exeter East and Exmouth described the significant shortfalls in recruitment and an exodus of skills personnel in recent years, and he is correct to do so. A number of members related it to the evidence that the Ministry of Defence collects in the continuing attitude surveys, which really stands as a roll call of shame for the previous government in relation to the falling morale that we have seen and the attitudes of our armed forces personnel. It is not their fault. It is a collective failure to address the issues that underpin service life, and that is one of the reasons why this government proposed an Armed Forces Commissioner, and why we must get it right to provide a direct contact for our Armed Forces personnel and their families. A number of members spoke about the culture in our armed forces. The vast majority of people who serve our country do so with the right values and the right attitude, but there are far too many examples where that is not the case. And I'm grateful for the member for Epsom and Ewell for raising the Atherton review. The report run by Sarah Atherton in the last Parliament, I think, should be compulsory reading for all members of Parliament. And I especially say to those new members who have joined us since the 2024 general election, it is well worth a Google to understand the experience of so many women in our armed forces, and worth having on your bedside table to familiarise yourself with. The member for Leyton and Wanstead spoke very passionately about bringing perpetrators to justice who act against the spirit of our armed forces and diminish the experience of service life for so many other people, and he is correct to do so. The member for Dunfermline and Dollar likewise spoke about the importance of lifting our culture. The Armed Forces Commissioner has been specifically designed so they can investigate issues related to general service welfare matters for those who serve and their families. It is not for me as a government minister, nor for the Secretary of State or anyone else on the government bench to set out what the Armed Forces Commissioner should investigate. It is for us to give that person the powers and the ability to get to the heart of the problems. And I'm grateful for all those people who very kindly gave, I think, the front bench some kind words of advice. The member for Plymouth Moorview said it won't be easy reading the reports of the Commissioner. The member for Livingston likewise. The member for Angus described the government as leaving themselves open to scrutiny, and the member for Bracknell spoke about the proof being in the pudding. They are all right about doing so. We are deliberately opening ourselves to scrutiny because it improves the lives of those people who serve and their families. It is the strength of this government that we can feel open to wanting additional scrutiny, and I'm grateful for members who encouraged it. And can I further encourage members to look at how these powers can be strengthened and scrutinised over the course of the passage of this bill. A number of members spoke about the application to veterans, and I'm grateful for all those in this debate who spoke about the important contribution of those people who have served our armed forces and have served our nations in years past. This bill is deliberately drawn to focus relentlessly on armed forces personnel serving today and their families. That is not because we wish to discard the experiences of veterans.
Far from it. It is because we believe, looking at the continued attitude surveys, the falling morale, more people leaving our armed forces than joining, that there is a problem that needs to be addressed for those people who are serving our nation. The powers of the Armed Forces Commissioner are deliberately drawn to focus relentlessly on those people who serve. It is explicit in this bill that we're looking at people who serve in uniform today and their families, and we make no apology for doing so, but a number of issues have been raised in this debate, and I'd be grateful for those colleagues who have done so to continue to take them up with my colleague, the Minister for Veterans and People, who is very keen to ensure that we not only support those veterans, but make sure that we can do so, especially in looking at the programmes and policies that exist today to make sure that's worthwhile. I'm happy to.
Mr. One of the great things with the bill the Commissioner is coming forward tonight is that many soldiers, many service personnel suffer from PTSD. They're reluctant to perhaps go forward and seek the help that they have. But the people who know them better are the families. So the families are able to do that on their behalf. That's the great thing about where we are tonight. It brings that opportunity for those who are maybe unable to do so, but their families can do it for them.
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's intervention, and he's right about the important role that families play, not just for serving personnel, but for veterans as well. I'm grateful that he raised families, and a number of honourable members spoke passionately about the important role that families play in supporting those armed forces personnel and how the Commissioner must be open to representations from family members. I'm grateful in particular for the intervention of the Select Committee Chair, who spoke about bereaved families in an intervention with the Secretary of State. The way this bill has been drafted means that we are not specifying the exact definition of family members in the face of the bill. That will be specified in a piece of secondary legislation that will be published between the House of Commons and the House of Lords stages. I know there's a number of members that raise concerns. I think, again, the member for Epsom, you'll talk about kinship carers, and I'm glad that she did. Be very happy further discussing that with her, because we want to get that right, and placing it on the bill today would enable that to be locked in. And I want honourable members from across the House to feel empowered to challenge and help us define that, to make sure that for those serving members and their families, it's drawn in an adequate way to deal with service life in all different shapes and sizes of families as we exist today. A number of members mentioned the 2.5% going on defence that this government has committed to. Explicitly, the Armed Forces Commissioner will be dealing with general service welfare matters. I think it's important I place that on the record, because the role of the Commissioner will be dealing with the lived experience for those people who serve and their families. That's not looking into secret squirrel operations or operational deployments. It will not be looking into 2.5% of defence, 2.4 or any other figure. It will be explicitly looking at the welfare matters of those people who serve. And I realise there's a number of colleagues in here who wish to make a point around 2.5%, and I would continue to encourage them to do so, and I hope they also welcome the £3 billion extra that was in the budget for defence only a few weeks ago. A number of members spoke about the Armed Forces Covenant and the manifesto commitment that this new government has to putting that fully into law. Can I reassure members that that determination to do so is strong in the Defence Ministerial team? The Defence Secretary himself has made clear that he wants to see that as part of the Armed Forces Bill. That's the next piece of legislation that the Ministry of Defence will be working on that seeks to put the Armed Forces Covenant fully into law. And I'm also grateful for those members who spoke passionately about how the Armed Forces Covenant is important in their constituencies. The member for Stoke-on-Trent Central, Hartlepool in particular, the member for Colchester, and my next door neighbour, the member for Plymouth Moorview, spoke very passionately about Armed Forces champions. He and I share a brilliant Armed Forces champion in Plymouth, in Councillor Pauline Murphy, and her determination and her fierce approach to protecting and supporting the Armed Forces family is precisely the determination that I hope to see from a future Armed Forces Commissioner, because we need someone relentlessly focused on improving service life. Yeah, please.
Thank you. When we get into committee next month, we can obviously explore these issues in more detail. But before he concludes, particularly as the Royal British Legion and Poppy Scotland were keen to know, could he just, before he sits down, update the House on where we are with the National Veterans Commissioner? Where have we got to on that?
Well, I'm grateful for his question. He might have missed my remarks earlier, pointing towards the Minister for Veterans and People, because this bill is about serving personnel. However, I recognise the genuine concern of which the organisations he relates to, and I would encourage him to speak to the Minister for Veterans and People, who is looking at that veterans representation at the moment. I would expect the Armed Forces Commissioner to have relationships with a whole host of organisations right across the country, and happy for that to be picked up. The Honourable Gentleman from Strangford asked some serious questions, as I believe the Shadow Minister did, about what happens for complaints being processed by the current Service Complaints Ombudsman that may be transferred to the Armed Forces Commissioner. If it's a service complaint, and if the complaint is related to a period of service and was raised within a time limit, then the Armed Forces Commissioner will continue to investigate, even if that complainant has left the forces. That's the same under the current SCOAF position now. And on new Armed Forces Commissioner investigations, it will be at the discretion of the Armed Forces Commissioner if they want to continue that investigation. But bear in mind that the investigations will largely be thematic rather than picking up an individual's case for a large piece there. And I hope that will reassure members that the work will continue and any complaint being currently delivered by the SCOAF will be continued. That gives me a good opportunity to thank our current SCOAF, Mariette Hughes, and her team for the work that she's doing. This bill is deliberately designed not to adjust the service complaint system. The opportunity to do that on a legislative basis may exist in the Armed Forces Bill, and members that may have concerns about the legislation relating to service complaints, I'm very happy speaking to, so we can make sure if any edits are required that is included in the next bill. A number of members asked who can raise a complaint to the Armed Forces Commissioner, and I'm pleased to confirm that whether someone is a regular, a reserve, a recruit or a rejoiner, they will be able to raise an issue with the Armed Forces Commissioner, indeed as will family members of those, in relation to the Commissioner's investigation work. And that relates to the rank and grade question that came from members. It is our understanding that we expect everyone, especially within defence, to treat the Armed Forces Commissioner with respect. The Secretary of State will be required by law to assist the Armed Forces Commissioner with their investigations, and the appointment process that we are seeking to start is for a very senior appointment. Can I reassure colleagues that the security clearance for the Armed Forces Commissioner will be required at a high level because of the visits that they may be making to military establishments, and they will be bound by the Official Secrets Act. So any investigations or anything they are come across on any of their base visits will be held in the same secrecy and classification as it deserves. The number of questions about digital access, can I say it will be up to the Commissioner to decide how people will be able to raise a issue with her, rather than us specifying it in the bill. But I understand the issues that colleagues have raised, and I would expect the Commissioner to be fully accessible on various platforms, both digital and non-digital. The devolution question was asked by my colleague from Dunfermline and Dollar. As this is a reserved matter, it is the responsibility of the Westminster Parliament to deal with this here. However, it may be conceivable that the Armed Forces Commissioner may investigate an issue that may be devolved in one of the devolved administrations, such as housing, for instance. That an issue that may be a responsibility of the Westminster Government in England may be devolved in Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland. In such circumstances, we'd anticipate that the Armed Forces Commissioner would engage with those devolved assemblies and administrations, and in such a way I would expect over time a relationship to be formed between those, so any issues can be addressed fully. The grip of the legislation is on the Ministry of Defence to apply, and to the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, of which the reports would ultimately flow through. But I recognise what the gentleman has said, and I hope that through the operation of this that will be developed. I'm really grateful for the Shadow Secretary of State to join me in one of my nerdy pursuits in defence legislation, that is asking why Gibraltar is not covered by any legislation. He will know, as a former Defence Minister, that the reason Gibraltar is often excluded from defence legislation as separated from other overseas territories is because Gibraltar has an agreement with the United Kingdom that they replicate the Armed Forces Act in their own legislation and will seek to do so, but serving personnel and their families stationed in Gibraltar should be under no doubt that they will be able to access the Armed Forces Commissioner. And can I also reassure the honourable member for Strangford that section 6.1 of the bill clearly sets out that this bill will apply to Northern Ireland and it will apply to all members of our United Kingdom family of nations. The budget that was raised by a number of colleagues, can I say that the budget has been modelled on the input that we see during the German model, and so that is why we're proposing an increase of the budget from the current SCARF budget to 4.5 to 5 million. The Shadow Minister did say that the figure had arisen a few times in the debates and wondered why. If he turns to page 12 of the explanatory notes, he will see it says 4.5 to 5.5 million, and that would be the reason why I suspect so many members were raising that figure in this debate. But it will be for the Armed Forces Commissioner to determine how many staff that they wish to employ, what roles they wish to do, and how that budget is allocated. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Defence Select Committee asked how this sits with our broader strategy for armed forces personnel. This is the first step in our work of renewing the contract between the nation and those who serve. It is exactly right, as my honourable friend mentioned earlier, that this is forming only one part of what we have announced. The wraparound childcare announcement made by the Secretary of State at the weekend, I think, is a good example of the direction of travel those people serving in our armed forces should expect from this government. A clear direction that says we will look not only at the kit and capabilities and doctrine in the Strategic Defence Review, we will look at the lived experience for each and every one who serves, seeing how we can improve it. And that relates to the broader strategy about how we can measure success. And I think it will be not only a measure of success in terms of the lived experience improvements, the additional scrutiny on issues that can come from that, but the opportunity for us to do so. And although I may disagree with the member for Portsmouth North and where the home of the Royal Navy is, as I represent Devonport in Plymouth, I'm very grateful for all the contributions. And can I finally just echo the words of the member for Aldershot, who I think summed up the debate very, very well when she said, Armed Forces personnel just want the basic equipment to do their jobs and a good life for their families, because if they are willing to fight for us, that is the least we can do. I commend this bill to the House.
Right, the question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of their opinions say aye? Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. I now move on to the programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. I now move on to the money motion to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. That concludes that portion of that.